Welcome in, everyone.
Hello.
This is Everything Sucks, Let's Fix It,
Episode 6.
6. Today is June 20th, 2023. We've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
So you should probably just get right into it.
Let's do it. If you don't follow us on Instagram, go follow us there. Everything sucks. Let's fix it. YouTube, same thing. And then on TikTok, it's es.lfi.
Definitely.
All right.
We're always posting stuff on the socials. It's mostly highlights from the podcast. But if you like more bite-sized bits of information, that can definitely help you out.
Yeah, definitely recommend it.
Okay, so we're going to kick it off with current events.
Let's get into it.
What do you want to start with? Let's
start with the summit with Anthony Blinken going to China. I think that's a really big deal.
Yes.
This meeting was supposed to happen a few months ago, but it got canceled because of the whole Chinese weather balloon incident.
Yes.
That, captured everyone's newsfeed for like a month.
Yeah. Which totally was not a weather balloon.
Yeah,
just
totally.
to be clear.
Yeah, definitely not a weather balloon.
Not at all.
No.
One thing that I read about this is how invested the U.S. was in making this meeting happen.
Yeah.
There were some suspicions that the Chinese spy balloon incident was for the purpose of preventing diplomatic interface between the two countries.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because there were some successes about this meeting, but there were also some negatives. And I can definitely picture a lot of Chinese elites who don't want what Anthony Blinken is asking for and is just trying to delay that inevitable cooperation between the two countries. And what I'm referring to is Anthony Blinken specifically went in there with the goal of trying to create an open military communication network between the Chinese military, the People Liberation Front, and the American military. And we have this relationship with Russia. Like during the Syrian civil war, there would be instances where American planes would be flying through some Russian areas or hitting a target that might be near Russian troops. And we would call up Russia. We would tell them what we were about to do, let them evacuate their troops, and then go on with the attack. And that was so accidents didn't happen. We didn't want an accidental Russian soldier getting killed by an American bullet, or the other way around, American soldier being killed with a Russian bullet, So the United States is trying to get that same relationship with China, and so far they're reluctant to do it. Now, Blinken has said that they're working on it, but what else is he going to say? He's not going to say that they're not working on it.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
And how much work does it really take to set up a phone line?
Right.
Yeah.
When he says he's working on it, he's trying to convince them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And then it scares me because why doesn't China want to set up the open line of communication? What's the drawback of it? Right. It only seems positive.
Yeah. And my hypothesis on this is China doesn't want this open line of communication because it means that if there are close calls, like there was just recently an incident in the South China Sea where a Chinese ship cut off an American Navy ship and forced the American cruiser to slow down to avoid collision. Something similar happened with military jets. I can see them wanting to continue to up this pressure, and if there's an open line of communication and the U.S. specifically asks about these incidents, China can't really stay in this gray zone of just pushing or applying enough pressure that doesn't break anything in the relationship.
Right. Blinken actually mentioned that naval example during the conversations, and there wasn't enough traction to encourage the open communication even from that. And that is like a great example. You don't want any of your ships to get damaged. That's really dangerous to all the sailors on board. And you put it best when you said that China wants to operate in the gray zone. When close calls like that happen and there's a line for communication, now someone's at fault. It's not an accident.
Yeah.
Right now, it's just an accident.
Yes.
Right. But once there's that open line of communication, now it's like an international problem.
Yeah, and it's so weird because it's obvious what the Chinese are doing with these incidents, and yet they're close enough to the line that they can still be plausibly denied as like purposeful confrontation. So they want to, the more they can stay ambiguous with those confrontations, the further they can push it. The
And it
more power they can
seems,
grab.
and America always has the ambiguous guarantee of Taiwan independence,
Mhm.
right? So America operates in this ambiguous framework sometimes too. But recently, Blinken came out fairly heavily and was like, we're not going to super support Taiwan militarily.
Oh, I didn't see that.
It's like, we're not totally committed to Taiwan independence.
Interesting.
I don't know what that means. Like maybe he meant like it's so confusing because the language is so hard to understand what you mean when you say that Taiwan is its own country or that there's only one China.
Yeah.
Right. It's such a difficult thing to understand. I don't imagine U.S. policy has changed over the last 20 years, but it's definitely, we've always been ambiguous with how we will defend Taiwan.
Yeah.
Whether won't we, Biden comes out, says we're gonna, and then 2 days later, the State Department's like, no, we don't know. We're not going to do that.
It's interesting because similar to something we talked about in our deep dive on the South China Sea last week, we kind of identified the U.S. as more the good guys in these confrontations with China because they're trying to uphold the rules-based system, which is supposed to deter war. Mm-hmm. And I kind of see it similarly, or not, maybe not good guy, bad guy, but I see China very much as the aggressor in the gray zone here. Whereas the U.S. is trying to use the gray zone in a defensive capacity.
Yeah, there's no getting around this where China is currently trying to break the rules order we have. America is trying to uphold the rules order we have. That's where we're at.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The only place that does get kind of questionable is when you discuss something like sovereignty of Taiwan, because that's something that the international order doesn't have a consensus on. Like even we are saying technically that we recognize one China, and yet
it doesn't mean
we're not acting like it.
No, not at all. No, I mean we have trade deals with Taiwan specifically. Mm-hmm. We interact with Taiwan as if they're their own country, right?
Yes.
So it's hard for us to say you are one China. Yeah. Taiwan plus mainland, but
really on the I guess the question is, what's the alternative? The alternative is completely support a one China, which means they totally have the green light to go invade Taiwan and start a war, kill hundreds of thousands.
There's no good line there. But so that's the military side of what Blinken was talking about. Then probably the largest problem in America, from my perspective, is the fentanyl crisis. It is the largest killer of Americans between the ages of 18 and 49. That is the largest reason why people die. And it doesn't seem like we have any avenues to combat it. A lot of these drugs come from Mexico into the United States, mainly from ports of legal entry. They're not being smuggled across the border in a lot of cases. They're being driven through the border after getting checkpointed, and they make it through. And in last year, they confiscated enough fentanyl to kill every single American at the border. That's how much fentanyl they've confiscated.
Wow.
Yes. Enough fentanyl to kill every single American in the country.
That's crazy.
So where is this fentanyl coming from? It used to come from China directly. It used to come from China into the ports of the United States and then into the country. But America and China had cooperation at stopping the fentanyl from getting from China to the U.S., the finished fentanyl product to the United States. Now, the Chinese companies have worked around this regulation and are now selling, these chemical companies are selling the raw chemicals necessary to produce fentanyl to Mexico. And then to these Mexican companies that are in bed with the cartels gets this and then ships it up to the United States as a finished fentanyl product. Now, Chinese businessmen have an incentive. They have the profit incentive to keep this relationship going. The Chinese government has somewhat of a relationship and an incentive to do this because they make money off of this company doing well.
And I wonder if the Chinese government also has incentive in poisoning our population.
Right. Well, look, this may be going too far for some, but the British did it with their opium wars, so now is China doing it with us? You know what I mean? So it could be a whole geostrategic play that they're trying to do. But the point is, Blinken is trying to say you need tighter regulation and you need to schedule fentanyl as a drug. They do schedule fentanyl as a drug in China. The United States currently doesn't. Our scheduling for fentanyl is weaker than China's at the moment. And Blinken made that clear where he's like, America and the legislative side needs to get that figured out. But the point is, how are we now going to regulate these Chinese chemical companies from getting these raw chemicals over to Mexico? Because literally it's the number one reason young adults / middle-aged adults are dying. And, I hope that there can be some cooperation, but he didn't indicate that they made like a lot of progress on that either.
Yeah. I mean, we just discussed all the Chinese incentives there are for keeping it going.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't expect it to be.
Right.
So weirdly, it's like they had this summit, and the only positive I can really take from it after talking about it is just the fact that the U.S. and China are still able to have diplomatic relations.
Right. That's all I get from it. That's like all I got from it is that the United States and China can still talk. And now Blinken is suggesting to invite China to maybe join or go to the meeting of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting in San Francisco later in the summer or September. I don't remember when it happens. But point is, China has been trying to get back in this organization / meeting here. It's like a meeting of the G7, right? It's like a meeting of all these economies of the Pacific region, and they're trying to work their way back into it. And this meeting, Blinken is suggesting they might come to. And Xi is also very eager to come to the United States and talk to Biden.
Oh.
And Blinken also mentioned that Xi might get the opportunity to come to the United States. So from my perspective, it seems like there's a lot of concessions to China right now. And I know, and we're going to talk later on in the podcast about what we've done to them, where we have kicked their economics ass. We have kicked their economy's ass in a lot of ways with their computing that we'll get into at the end. But out of this meeting, it seems like China came out ahead.
Interesting.
That's my reading.
What do you think? I mean, Blinken had to let that happen, right? Why? Like,
Why?
Does it just feel like at this very moment what's needed is some softening? Like tensions are too high, so Biden and his team huddle up and they're like, we're gonna ease their concerns a little bit.
I think there's definitely a softening, and I don't really blame them because we did cancel a meeting on them a few months ago. Some Chinese elites wanted the meeting to be canceled, others didn't. Other Chinese officials were super disrespected that it was canceled. And the Biden administration started with a meeting in Alaska between China and the United States, and that went horribly.
Yeah.
That went horribly.
But that also seemed, I mean, I watched video of that meeting, which seemed kind of like it was triggered by the Chinese diplomat. Of course. Yeah.
Right. This is all, again, China is the aggressor in these instances. The United States is not, we're not threatening the order here.
Yeah.
We're not threatening the rules.
Exactly. It seems like we're responding in the best way we can.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I mean, look, the fentanyl thing, it's going to be hard because the way that they're getting around it now, they're going to need more state regulation to understand what the companies are in Mexico that the chemical companies are selling to, and now track, okay, do these Mexican companies have ties to the cartel? That's a lot of work.
And again, no benefit.
Yeah, there's no benefit to China.
They're not selling fentanyl to the Chinese.
No, they're not.
So
now it's getting into Canada. Now it's getting to Europe.
It
was an American drug for a while, but now it's getting into Latin America a lot. It's getting a lot into Canada. It's starting to pop up in Europe.
Wow.
Yeah, fentanyl is a crisis.
Yeah.
And, one that isn't talked about enough. If the Republicans, one thing I agree with the Republicans on a lot, this Congress, is their anger at the fentanyl crisis. And that's well warranted. Well warranted priority.
Yeah.
Okay. Next, I think we should talk about some positive news out of New York.
Sure.
New York is moving to protect doctors who send abortion pills into states with abortion bans. So, as we know, Roe v. Wade was overturned a year ago. Reset the political stage in a lot of ways. Helped the Democrats win the general election back in November. But a lot of Republican states took it upon themselves now that Roe v. Wade was gone to enact abortion bans throughout the country. Now, these are abortion bans. Some are 12 weeks, some are 15 weeks, some are 6 weeks. Two notable ones that are 6 weeks, two notable states that we'll get into are Iowa and Florida. These states now have 6-week bans. Most women don't know they're pregnant by 6 weeks. So this is just designed to basically take away your right to an abortion. But now this poses a very interesting question. What happens when someone gets help from outside of the state? What if someone, a Florida resident, seeks health care from a not Florida doctor. Who is chargeable in that case? And is the doctor breaking the law? New York says they're not. New York says any doctor who prescribes the abortion pill and sends it to their patient through telehealth and telemedicine, that the New York will not cooperate, or any individual out of any state agency will not cooperate with any legal activity being prosecuted from out of state. And this is something that we see coming from other communities too. I'm an elected official in Brookline, Massachusetts, and one of the laws we passed this session was any woman or person who comes to this state to either receive reproductive care or gender-affirming care we will protect them from prosecution from the state that they're fleeing to get this health care. So this is these liberal states are now becoming like bastions of these social policies, which I think is really good. And it's leveraging the power we do have over these healthcare decisions, that's going to be able to get the care to people who need them, even if they live in red states.
I agree. That sounds fantastic.
But it poses an interesting legal question.
Yes.
Can a state do that? Can a state say, I don't like your law, so we're going to protect you if your state chooses to? It's like saying like murder. It's like saying one state, it's illegal to murder.
Yeah. And
in other states, like it's not legal to murder.
Yeah.
If you run to a different state after committing murder, you're not getting extradited?
Well, is it that okay, so this is the equivalent of running to a different state after committing murder in your home state. It's not the equivalent of going to a different state and committing murder there, or is it? That's what I'm wondering about this. Because I think like going to a different state and getting treated, that seems really hard to say, like you can convict someone or you can charge someone based on their residency rather than based on where they committed the crime. But then again, if I relate that to, say, corporate crime, and it means that companies that have the majority of their operation, like Apple, headquartered in Ireland, with the majority of operations, say, in China, and sales or designing that's happening in the U.S. and Silicon Valley, it doesn't make sense for Apple to be treated as an Irish company. Right. So this is one of those where it's hard for me to really find conviction.
It gets even harder when we talk about the pill going into a red state.
Yes.
Then that gets way harder, because now that doctor who's sending the pill is breaking a Florida crime or helping a woman break a Florida crime. But the United States, but like New York is saying, we're not going to help you get him out. We're not going to help you extradite him.
Sure.
Or charge him.
Yeah.
Which makes him basically untouchable.
Yeah, I mean, countries do it.
Countries do it.
Why shouldn't states?
I just think it's interesting because I don't know another aspect. I don't know another time in my life where different states were having these competing laws that are directly protecting against the extradition of their citizens from a different state.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This seems like a very this is very conflict heavy partnership between states right now that I don't think we've seen recently.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting.
Yeah, which I mean feels like it follows the trend of our general political polarization.
Absolutely. Of course. And now, about the abortion, do you have anything else you want to say about the pill story?
Not necessarily.
Okay. No. So then this leads perfectly into what's going on in the Republican primary. Ron DeSantis has basically, I don't want to say collapsed against Donald Trump, but he's not doing well. Ron DeSantis is losing support to guys like Chris Christie right now. Ron DeSantis is losing support to guys like Tim Scott. And he's not getting at the Trump percentages. Ron DeSantis isn't making progress against Trump voters. People are making progress against DeSantis voters.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a really big problem for the Republican Party that hates Trump overall.
Totally.
But it's going to be a bigger problem for DeSantis if he can't even if he can't get the Never Trumpers to rally behind him anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this before about how DeSantis doesn't seem like he has a route. And I think this only hurts him politically, because I think when you think about the hardcore Republican base, you think they're pretty much locked in for Trump.
Yeah.
So being the most extreme on abortion is only driving you further away from the swing voter who's like, I don't really care about much in politics, but it seems kind of common sense that you should be able to abort a baby like after 6 weeks,
Right.
At least to 16 weeks or whatever
Right.
it's going to be. And you just talked about how abortion really changed the political landscape, especially in 2022. This to me feels like it's a smarter play by Trump to be a little bit more hands off, say, I just think it should be left up to the states.
Yeah.
That's something that a lot of swing voters on abortion can more get behind.
But does a Republican primary voter like that? So now what we're referring to here is there was Ron DeSantis went on a Christian news network and he's talking about his pro-life record. And in this conversation, he says, Florida passed a 6-week abortion ban, the same as Iowa's 6-week abortion ban, and then named the Iowa governor, who I can't remember. But that's important for a different reason that we'll talk about in a second. But he's really touting, he's like, I'm the most conservative guy when it comes to abortion rights. And then he says, Trump said that my solution, the 6-week abortion ban, was too conservative. He's like, I don't believe anything is too conservative. There isn't too conservative enough for me.
Yeah.
This is common sense. The baby has a heartbeat, or whatever he says.
Sure.
So he's making this distinction against Trump. And if he's tap into the evangelicals, maybe he has a shot.
I can see the reasoning, and
Right?
I think I agree with it. It's like, if making a play for the evangelicals, this should help. I just don't think it will.
No, I don't think it will.
No.
If you can look at polls right now this might change in a couple weeks, but I don't think it will. The people who say that they're very conservative are voting for Trump. You can't really out conservative Donald Trump because conservatism is Donald Trump.
Exactly. You have to take the other lane.
You have to take the other lane.
Yeah.
Because you will never be able to outflank Trump on the right. It's not going to happen because people, the policy things, it's not what matters right now.
Yep.
It's not. It's about the cultural oomph.
Exactly.
You know? And DeSantis doesn't have that oomph.
No, absolutely not.
No. But he is making a play for Iowa. So when he says that we have this 6-week abortion ban down in Florida, and then he says, Iowa, you have this 6-week abortion ban too. Aren't you happy with that? Iowa is the first state to vote in a Republican primary. And if Ron DeSantis can get good showing in Iowa, it's very plausible he can ride that into a win in New Hampshire and then ride that into a better Super Tuesday / Nevada showing / South Carolina showing.
Yeah.
But which are the next states to go in the primary order. But that's what Ted Cruz tried. Sure. Ted Cruz won Iowa in 2016 because of the same reason. Evangelical, the pro-life candidate, still ended up losing.
Yeah.
So look, I think it might be his best strategy, but I still think it's a losing strategy.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page. Honestly, looking at the polling right now, you have other Republicans who, like Mike Pence is sitting at 5.8%, Nikki Haley 4.1%, Tim Scott 3%. No one's above 6% besides DeSantis and Trump.
Right.
Trump also still has a 32-point lead over DeSantis.
Yeah.
So the thing is, in these early primaries, I think no one is going to be waiting to see how DeSantis does. They already know he's the number 2 option. He's really the only other viable candidate who could even possibly come out of this primary. So people aren't going to be holding their breath watching Iowa and New Hampshire being like, this is going to determine whether it'll be worth it to cast my vote for DeSantis.
Yeah.
And him being aligned with Trump and only trying to get around Trump by outflanking him on the right only kind of plays into that, where he can win a few states. It doesn't matter.
I think it's like he's in our lifetime, Obama did the win Iowa, shock the nation, jump 10 points in the polls, win the Democratic primary against Hillary Clinton. That was Obama's strat, and it worked. He outlined his strategy with David Axelrod in his book, The Promised Land. I think it's called that. Whatever, his most recent autobiography. And in that, he talked about, he's like, look, if we don't win Iowa, we don't have the media coverage and it's over. And I think there is some truth to that, but I think Obama was less of a known entity than DeSantis is.
Exactly.
Yeah, which I think is what you were getting at,
yes,
right?
DeSantis is a known commodity. You're not really going to provide anything new. Like, you can hammer home the points that you've already established, but
yeah,
with Obama coming out as just a senator, I don't know, it seems to make a lot more sense versus a Hillary who had already been the first lady since the 90s.
Right. Yeah, when you think about it, Obama was a senator for 2 years, and he had no real political credentials. Then he wins Iowa, and it's like, oh man, this guy can win.
Yeah.
Okay, well now we know that DeSantis won Florida by 20. He's been governor for 4 years, going to be 6 by the time the election starts. We know what we're getting.
Yeah, and Obama is also a really exciting candidate.
Which
First
DeSantis
black
is
president.
not.
Yeah, exactly. Like a great speaker. It makes sense that, yes, getting that media coverage is going to be essential for him to propel his campaign forward. DeSantis, every time I see him or hear him talk, I feel like he's shooting himself in the foot.
I feel like I
he's
want to
taking a
laugh
step
every
back.
time he opens his mouth.
Yeah.
And I want to laugh every time Trump opens his mouth, but it's a different type of laugh. I think like Trump actually has, I think, extremely good political instincts, and I think he's an absolute political killer when he wants to be.
Yeah.
I don't think DeSantis is a political killer at all.
No.
So that's that. I think DeSantis is screwed, but he's taking the pro-life, hardcore evangelical lane that Ted Cruz took. So we'll obviously keep you updated on the Republican primary as we go on, because it's going to be a riot. And when the debates start,
The debates are going to be great.
the debates are going to be so funny.
Yeah, I know.
Oh my God.
I mean,
we should do like everything sucks, let's fix it, inspired drinking games for the Republican debates.
that sounds fun. We could also live stream it, which is
I
gonna
would
be
love
a
to do
great
that.
reason to follow our socials.
Yes, please go follow us on the socials. But
Yeah.
yeah, we're totally going to live stream. That's an awesome idea.
That would
Dude.
be fantastic.
Yeah, we'll make drinking bingo cards.
Yes. Wonderful.
Okay, again, now we're going to go back to serious stuff. So the Supreme Court session is almost over for the summer. And we've actually seen a not super conservative court, as we would have expected. This is supposed to be a 6-3 conservative court, and the decisions haven't been overwhelmingly bad. Obviously, we've talked about some that are not. That we talked about some cases that have come out. One specifically was bad for striking workers, but there were also some positives. We recently had a case out of Alabama that made it so more that there was going to be more black representation into the House of Representatives, and justices like John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh both admitted that due to Alabama's very obvious racist past, there needed to be some more black representation out of that state. That's really good to see out of Brett Kavanaugh, and really good to see out of John Roberts.
It's interesting because this reminds me, and I know we're about to get into the book, but
Yes.
one thing that this book that we've been talking about discusses is the, I don't know the exact term, but the need for heightened scrutiny.
Heightened scrutiny.
When a specific disadvantaged class almost is at play. So it makes sense that in these cases, those justices understand that, yes, they want to apply that heightened scrutiny to these laws.
And race is one of those avenues that does need heightened scrutiny in the Constitution currently. Now, we've talked about in the book how there was a push to get poverty to be in the avenue for heightened scrutiny, which didn't happen. But the fact that they didn't throw race's heightened scrutiny out, I really like to see that. But the point is, there are about to be some decisions that could totally throw this liberal, not I want to say liberal, but moderate court streak out the window. We're about to come up with some very, very important decisions, literally over the next 2 months. And they really have an opportunity to change America as we know it. The first one is affirmative action. We are going to talk about a case when we get into our book that reinforced affirmative action in the 70s. And we now have a court that is set to abolish affirmative action in our universities. This is going to hurt a lot of people if this happens. This is going to hurt a lot of African American, Black, Brown communities that have worked hard for this representation historically and have suffered due to their positions of poverty and positions of discrimination. It makes it difficult to break into these institutions, and these programs designed to get them in there are looking like they're going to be gone.
Yeah. But maybe not.
But maybe not.
Based on how the court has been voting, based on these surprise votes. Because the expectation is that the conservative liberal alignment right now is 6-3 as far as the justices. So it's surprising kind of that the two conservative justices agreed to redistrict the Alabama congressional districts.
Yeah.
Maybe we get a similar surprise with affirmative action.
And I'll say this also, Neil Gorsuch has had some really, really amazing decisions when it comes. Neil Gorsuch was the one that Trump appointed first in his first year. And he is really, really good on Native American tribal rights. He is maybe the strongest and most consistent supporter of Native American tribal rights that the United States Supreme Court has ever seen. And again, that's one of those avenues that the conservative side did not expect.
Yeah.
So a lot of these, there are some decisions that maybe Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, they might not be as conservative in this area, and maybe affirmative action can live. But again, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
So that's only the first case. The next one is the right to refuse services. So now businesses are suing for the right to not do business for gay weddings.
Wow.
We now have a conservative court that might give people the right to refuse service based off their sexual orientation.
That seems dangerous. Also, kind of shocking. It would shock me, because the idea of, I guess it's going to decide whether sexual orientation is an identification which should fall under heightened scrutiny.
And I mean, I know sexual orientation is a protected. Actually, I don't think it's a protected class.
Yeah, that's what I wonder. That, like, it seems like this is the case to determine that.
Yes.
And I think you and I would agree that it should be, because sexual orientation is not a choice.
It's an immutable characteristic.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's genetically based. So hopefully they do that. But of course, there are conservatives, evangelicals, who argue that homosexuality is a choice.
I imagine, this is my guess. You ready? You have to serve. My guess is the court is going to decide that you do not have the right to refuse people who have who are homosexual, unless it's for a specific thing that they're doing that's going to interfere with your religion. And that's why the cases around same-sex marriage, baking a cake for same-sex weddings. Point is, the court is going down a whole rabbit hole right now.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a crazy month.
Exciting, I guess.
Exciting, I guess.
I don't scary.
Scary is the right word.
Yes.
I really hope that affirmative action doesn't die. And I really hope that, gay people don't get more discriminated against.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a nightmare.
That sounds good.
That sounds like a good plan, right?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
Now to read about more bad things.
Yeah, now to read about so many more bad things, which surprised me. How many bad things, dude?
Really? Okay.
I think so.
That's not what I would have described, because this chapter, it focused on two cases.
Okay, yes. I'll say two bad things, but they've had some of the largest implications about the things I care about.
Yeah.
So
you bring this up all the time.
Literally all the time.
Oh my God.
So we are reading Supreme Inequality by Adam Cohen, the Supreme Court's 50-year battle for a more unjust America. We are reading the chapter about education-related cases this time around. Last week we talked about poverty. Now we're going to be talking about the court's role in our education system.
Yes.
And honestly, I want to give the author some credit. Amazing narrative for a nonfiction book. Yeah. Amazing narrative.
I agree.
I felt a connection to the kids that he was talking about in the court cases. I just loved it. Can't recommend the book enough to you guys. You should read along with us, because it's so good.
I almost didn't like feeling the connection because it was so sad. It was heartbreaking. And it's also heartbreaking to read because, like, based on the name of the book, Supreme Inequality, you know it's going to end poorly. Like, the cases he's talking about are not positive ones.
No.
So, like, I'm reading about, like, the fight that's happening on the good side, the fight for equal distribution of funding throughout states for education. I'm like, oh my God, this seems so positive. Yes. It seems like they have such a great case, and to know that this is going to end with the Supreme Court overturning the rules to equally distribute the funds is so depressing. And it's like, it seems impossible based on how good of an argument they have.
I know.
But they do it. So what we're talking about is San Antonio Independent School District v. Rodriguez in October 1972. So there had been a walkout in 1968 of students in a Texas high school who were protesting the lacking funding of their schools. And they were, I think I'm describing the right example here when I say they were being forced to take classes on a second floor of the school that had been declared like unsafe to be in. Their teachers were, I think 47% of their teachers were teaching on emergency stipends or declarations or something.
A lot of them weren't college educated.
Most of them weren't college educated. The bottom line is there was this district in Edgewood, I think was the town name, that was right next to another town, which was
Alamo Heights.
Alamo Heights. Yes. And there was a difference of something like $500 per student per year in the funding.
More than that, $5,000.
I think you're talking about a different
What am I talking
example.
about? Oh, I'm talking about I'm sorry. So wait, it's just so to clarify. The Edgewood had a $4,600 median income. And the Alamo Heights had an $8,000 median income for the county.
Yes. Okay. And so this is where I guess there's a lot of context we have to give. The reason the median income matters so much for the county is because this also drives property values. Mm-hmm. Property values are, and you've mentioned this before, property taxes are used to fund public schools. When property values are high, property taxes are higher. So what this ends up adding up to is that in the poor district, Texas students are getting about $300 per student per year spent. In the richer district, and these are like basically neighboring districts.
Yeah, it's like a road down the way.
Yeah, same metro area. It's $800 plus per student per year. Huge disparity. And so this person whose name is Rodriguez and who I feel like I should know the first name of, but I don't. He was one of the students who had walked out in protest of the school. And they took actually, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Okay. So So where are we at?
No.
The governor is so the kids walk out. They're protesting the bad conditions, and the governor is unresponsive, even though he has appointed an advisor, and this advisor recommended that some action was taken to try to get more money to the school district. The legislative and the executive branch of Texas was not going to respond. Mm-hmm. So the poverty lawyers decided, okay, the court's got to be the way to do it. And this guy named Arthur Gochman took up the case. Mm-hmm. And Arthur Gochman was a poverty lawyer, and he was going to fight for these kids in Texas. Mm-hmm. Now, there was a movement so this doesn't exist in a confined space. There was a movement among law students and in law schools that are fighting for equal education of all social classes. A guy named Arthur Weiss out of the University of Chicago. He was a graduate student, and he was actually formulating a funding strategy to prove that the way that we currently fund schools through property taxes was unconstitutional because it distributes, different amount of money per pupil to different areas, and that's causing an unequal education.
Exactly. So on this basis, they take a case to the Texas Supreme Court, I believe, and they're arguing.
They go to a federal district in San Antonio. Yeah. So there's 3 judges on this panel.
Yes, not the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
My bad. They're arguing that disparities in funding between Texas' wealthiest and poorest school districts are violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Yes.
Ends up being a huge victory.
3-0. A unanimous victory. And what made it so interesting was the author specifically cited, the decision specifically cited Brown v. Board and said, because in Brown v. Board, in that decision, the ruling opinion said education is perhaps the most important function of a state and local government, is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. That was written in Brown v. Board. So the federal district saying this is now insinuating that maybe education is a fundamental right. Mm-hmm. Now, we'll talk about what fundamental rights are consistently throughout this podcast.
Yes.
And it means something that the state is going to fight equal access for to everybody.
Definitely. I think fundamental interest might be the term.
What did I say?
fundamental right.
No, fundamental interest is the term.
Yeah,
You're right.
I
It's
just
fundamental
wanna-
interest.
And so when we were talking about the last chapter, we contrasted very similar cases that were made, distinguishing between filing for bankruptcy, which
Yes.
was not determined to not be a fundamental interest, and filing for divorce,
Yes.
which was determined to be a fundamental interest, and it allowed courts to strike down a fee needed to file for divorce, but they upheld the fee needed to file for bankruptcy. So what happened in the ruling for this case out of the Texas District Court, it said that education is a fundamental interest. It declared it solidly. They said that you could not discriminate from the education provided on the basis of wealth.
Incredible.
Huge. Yeah,
The
sweeping victory.
nation was joyous after this, and there were amazing decisions that were going around. Amazing news articles that were being published talking about the success of this happening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, outside of Texas, there's a movement across the country. We have a similar case in California, Serrano v. Priest, and here the plaintiffs are arguing that the school finance system broke the California Constitution.
In addition
In addition
to the 14th Amendment.
to the 14th Amendment. So this is really strong for students in California because now this doesn't have to go to the national Supreme Court. It just has to go to the state Supreme Court, prove it breaks the state constitution, and then you win.
Mm-hmm.
So that was coming out of California. And while this is all happening too, we have guys writing papers like Private Wealth and Education coming out of universities from California, University of California, Berkeley, really changing the national conversation. And it's becoming a national conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And, now this Rodriguez decision from the federal district is coming in. You're gaining a lot of momentum.
Yes. The Serrano case ends up happening, and it's once again a success for the plaintiffs. They
Yes.
hold that the California school finance system violated equal protection and violated the state constitution. And so what you get is this wave of lawsuits, and they're happening in states all across the country. And eventually you have more than 50 that are happening right around this era. And these articles are writing about really like a really exciting broader revolution.
Yes.
In the Wall Street Journal, they talked about how this could reshape the face of America, that it could, if similar challenges to a host of vital public services like housing, welfare, and healthcare
Yes.
could be totally expanded across the country to a much wider variety of
Like,
people.
what happens if housing becomes a fundamental interest? What happens if healthcare becomes a fundamental interest? Then what?
Mm-hmm.
So, but now, after this happens, Texas, on the losing side of this court case, well, what was their argument? What was Texas saying in the courtroom? Texas was saying that the differences were justifiable due to local control and the idea that local communities had control over their schools. And they did not want to damage that local control of the school district.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what Texas is coming out.
That's what Texas said. And specifically in the ruling written by the Texas judges, they struck down that argument, or they disagreed with that argument and said this clearly isn't the case because poorer districts, or honestly districts in general, don't have any control over how much funding they get.
Exactly. The taxable money per resident between Alamo and Edgewood, we're talking about like 3 times, 4 times fold differences.
Yeah.
So Edgewood doesn't have the choice to tax more. There's nothing more to tax.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole thing was gone. So now, after this success, all across the country, Wyoming, New Jersey, states were ruling for equal funding for schools. I want to just sit back and think about this for a second. This totally changes everything about our school districts, the ones that we all grew up in. If you're watching this, you grew up in a school district that was funded through your local property taxes in many cases. Now, if all school districts were be giving equal funding throughout the state, think about all the bad schools that existed inside of the inner cities that had such terrible funding mechanisms that would have had better opportunity for growth of, you know what I mean?
Totally.
So it totally would have changed the game.
Yeah.
Totally different.
And education is obviously where the groundwork is laid for these communities to become what they are. Like, having underfunded education so clearly perpetuates violence, like
Yes.
a tendency towards crime and not being able to support families well enough. Like,
not getting a good education is a poverty trap.
yes,
It creates generational poverty.
exactly.
It creates a nasty generational poverty.
And it specifically talks about later when he discusses the impact
Oh yeah.
of not equalizing education is how 6.6 million students nationwide are receiving less educational opportunity than they would with equal funding.
Yes, and that's just not him citing a random number.
No.
That's him citing, I think he's citing a Brookings Institute study in that case.
Yeah.
And, you know, 6.6 million children that would have had a better education otherwise.
And it's a very significant gap, because I think he also talks about how underfunded students compared to well-funded students end up having a difference of like 1 full year of education by the time they're out of secondary school.
A full year?
Yeah. That's absurd.
No, it's unbelievable. And now there are other things that go into this, like what the benefits would have been, right? So it's not just the benefits to these students. There's also a societal benefit. A 20% increase in funding for low-income students was found to result in a 20% reduction in the incidences of poverty.
Yes. Yes.
What an easy trade-off.
Is much better spent on these poor students in these poor areas.
Yes. Well, because what are we going to do? It's either we spend the money when they're a child and help them get out of poverty, or we spend the money to throw them in jail once they get in poverty. So it's like a $1 today or $3 tomorrow. You pick, America.
Yeah.
And we're choosing the $3 tomorrow.
Exactly. Just because it would need to be taken from the districts that have it already. And that is the problem. And there's a perfect example of this.
Yes.
And I don't know. I think it'll be skipping ahead because we have to start talking about Milliken v. Bradley if I want to get into this.
No, but I have a quote. So the mayor of Beverly Hills is really mad about this. And he says that the way to lift the bottom isn't to drag down the top.
Yeah. What are we talking about?
What are we talking about, man?
What are we talking about?
Oh, God. Yes. And there's more conservatives who are starting to get worried about this.
Yeah.
They're really getting worried that we're going to start declaring a lot of things fundamental interests.
Yeah.
And it gets dicey. So now let's move on to the next big case in education.
Well, I don't think so, because we need to talk about this going to the Supreme Court. Because we've only talked about the good part of the story. Right. And I just described
how it never ends well.
Doesn't end well. So the Supreme Court takes it up. And I don't have much about the context around their opinions besides that they overturn the ruling.
I have something here. So the main person who's really leading the charge against this is Justice Powell.
Yes.
Now, Justice Powell was appointed by Nixon, and he got through the Senate as somewhat of a moderate. They didn't look at him and think that he was like an activist conservative. That wasn't his vibe, for lack of a better word. It just wasn't his reputation. But as this decision was getting discussed and getting to the court, it was discovered in a news article, a reporter found out that Powell wrote to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in 1971 in a piece titled Attack on American Free Enterprise System. And he wrote that capitalism was under attack by not just radicals, but by previously respectable aspects of our society, the universities, organized religion, and the courts.
Yeah.
And he urged big business to get involved in the courts and triple the effort that liberals and unions and racial justice groups were putting towards winning court cases. And he was pushing to get the big businesses involved. And the Senate didn't know about this when they voted to appoint him, to put him in there. So they voted for him almost unanimously. And the FBI failed to find it when they did the background check on Powell. And Anderson, the reporter who found this information, said it raises a question about his fitness to decide any case involving business interests. And this guy got on the court.
Yeah.
And I looked up this thing, the Attack on American Free Enterprise System, and I read the whole thing. It's not very long.
Okay.
It's not very well written. But the response, first of all, it's just just a gushing of capitalism and a fear of change. But the main thing is the responses of historians. And there are historians I read about that directly looked to this writing and said that this was the beginning of the neoliberal age of America. This was the shift. This writing was the shift away from the New Deal.
Wow.
Many, many historians take this as the pivot point in the American economy. This is the end of the New Deal.
That's wild.
That piece of writing is the end of, I literally got the chills. That's the end of the New Deal.
Oh,
I know.
Again, like we're talking about the feelings of being invested, but also seeing it going down the wrong path.
Yes, and you're just like, stop,
no.
turn around, make a left, please.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking.
Okay, and so of course Powell's the author of the majority opinion when the court overturns the ruling of the Texas court 5-4. He insists on the Texas point that their school finance system had exemplified the American ideal of leaving localities free to tailor programs to their own needs.
Local control.
Yeah. Which we're going to get to later ends up being quite hypocritical for the conservative justices.
Yeah, it's not actually a thing that they believe. We're going to get into it. I know that that's going to cause a lot of like, what do you mean it's not a belief? Trust me. Yeah. The next decision that comes, another decision that comes down the pipeline, they throw local control out the window and they say, I don't believe in local control.
Exactly. So one other thing I have here is that Marshall writes the dissent and says that this decision could only be seen as a retreat from our historic commitment to equality of educational opportunity. And this is something I went on a little bit of a rant about in our last episode.
And it was an amazing one.
Ben. And when I read this, I was like, that is exactly where I was coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Marshall writes some of the most impassioned dissents in this decade, in the 70s.
Yes.
That are truly inspiring. I think Marshall writes some amazing stuff out of here that really could inspire a whole political movement.
Yeah. This book talks about how he's writing every dissent.
Every single one.
Everyone. He is so impassioned. That is just the best word that you can use.
What's his background? He was the main lawyer of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, appointed by Johnson. He was the guy fighting for civil rights in every courtroom across America.
He was the lawyer on Brown v. Board.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, like the liberal standard bearer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's actually amazing that the lawyer of Brown v. Board became a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
That's very cool.
Out of all the things that go wrong in America, I think that's one of the most amazing things you've ever done. The guy who fought for desegregation became a Supreme Court justice. I think that's beautiful. So, okay, so we had a little nice rant about Marshall, and we do like him, but now we're about to get into some depressing stuff.
Of course. As we must.
The New York Times reported on the case, and the way that they framed it, I hated. The New York Times headline wasn't impoverished kids get worse schools. The New York Times didn't say like Supreme Court overrules lower court in shock case. The headline was plaintiff is bitter.
I must say, this is where I wonder if the liberal bias is happening too.
That's fair.
Because it seems like based on the amount of media attention that the case was getting before, like after the success in Texas, that maybe the New York Times ran multiple articles about the ruling. I would assume that they probably just described the ruling before, and then a few days later or a week later is when they're like, okay, let's get the inside scoop with the people. And then sure, like plaintiff's bitter. I read that and I was like, okay, I know you're trying to make me upset at the mainstream media coverage, but they want readers.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
No, you're right. Listen, we've talked about this in the last podcast. There are definitely moments in this book where there are instances of liberal bias. We're going to own that. Yeah. We know it. But what I want the audience to understand is we see it, and we're going to talk about it as we see it. Exactly. So don't think like we're not going to talk about it when it comes up, because when it comes up, it's obvious.
Yes.
And we're going to explain it.
I mean, I don't want to toot our horns too much. There's definitely chances that we're going to miss some things.
Oh yeah,
because
of course.
We're human, but we're not just going to lean into. We're not going to ignore these clear signs.
No, and that's a clear sign.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So this case, again, really close to just revolutionizing education, and how close it came is what's so sad.
So this is where something really kind of sparked in my head is, so he describes specifically the different ways how this court might have gone differently, where, say, like, if you've followed along, you know that there was a whole debacle about Lyndon Johnson trying to nominate a new Supreme Court justice as Chief Justice Earl Warren was retiring at the end of Johnson's term, of his second term, and he failed to do that because his nominee got blocked. And then later on, Nixon led a smear campaign against another liberal justice, Abe Fortas, and got him removed. So the book mentions those two events as opportunities for the liberals to have held on to the court and to have a different decision here. What I really thought about was they really keep hammering this point of how this could have gone differently. And they haven't just done that for this case. They do it for pretty much every case that they bring up.
Yeah.
And I was like, they're doing this because they need the reader to understand how much power the court has in deciding the outcomes of our legislation. That it is the court that is ruling this country just as much, if not more, than the legislature or the executive branch.
That's a fantastic point. They're trying to, honestly, Adam Cohen is trying to scare you. Adam Cohen is like, look, because we didn't elect Hubert Humphrey, we have terrible schools.
Yes.
Because we didn't elect Hubert Humphrey, we have more segregation across America.
Yes.
If we would have elected Hubert Humphrey, this wouldn't have happened. That's basically what he's getting at.
Mm-hmm. But even that, like, I don't love framing it that way. I mean, it's true,
right?
But because we're still relying on the executive branch, and this is saying, like, look at the flaws in how our court is run. Like,
yes.
Look at how something can happen where this doctrine is written by Powell and it's not discovered by the FBI, and so it goes unnoticed, but he gets to be the deciding vote in these massively important decisions.
Exactly.
Like, something is systematically wrong here, and we need to fix it.
And the systemic problem is not one that he's gotten to yet. Maybe we haven't finished the book, so we don't know.
No.
But he hasn't gone to a systemic critique of the court. And that's what upsets me, is because I want to see the court is fundamentally broken in the way that it is ruled.
Yes.
It's fundamentally broken.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen that yet. Maybe we will, but...
Well, it's funny because, I mean, Stiglitz talked about this to in some depth as well. And we discussed his measures seeming like half measures, or not really seeming like solutions that would actually fix the court. We don't really have proposed ideas to fix it either. In a way, I can see Cohen's job as being much easier as being the chronicler. He's not the solution provider.
Right. He's not the guy who's going to prescribe the way to fix it.
No.
He's going to tell you how it was, how it is, and how it's going to be.
And he's hoping that will galvanize more energy towards creating a solution.
Yes.
That's what I get from this.
And even we talked about when we read People, Power, and Profits by Joseph Stiglitz, which is the last book we read. He didn't really give a good solution, like you said. And he was also very tepid to give a very systemic critique.
Yeah.
He was very tepid to say we need to democratize the court, which is what I would kind of be in favor of. There's a lot of states that have Supreme Court elections. And I think that's way better than what we have now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If it's going to be a political process, which it already is, you get appointed by someone we elect. Just let us elect them.
Yeah.
Cut out the middleman. Let's just do it.
Exactly.
So, okay. Now let's get into the next case, because I think we're about to get there, right?
Milliken v. Brown.
Yes.
That's where I'm at.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, well, I guess sorry. I don't want to hold this up too much. The only other interesting thing is so after this case failed in the Supreme Court, the shift was like the battle would have to go to the states, which is possible, but takes so much more work.
So much more money.
So much more money. And so there have been states that won cases to equalize school funding, but implementation has often failed in those cases. And so this is where, again, the Supreme Court specifically is so important, because a win at the federal level would give the court the ability to order Congress to use federal education funding to compel states to equalize their funding.
Yes.
They have so much more power. And this is something that even the Texas court didn't actually
address.
Yeah, it didn't give a solution.
No.
They just said, you have to come to us with a different idea that doesn't violate the 14th Amendment.
Yeah. Like, we're not going to tell you how to fund it, but go figure out how to fund it.
Exactly.
Which is hard on the states.
Which is hard on the states, and also, to me, in my mind, like, less likely to actually be implemented.
Yeah.
And implementation is something that I'm very interested in, so I'm going to keep bringing that up.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
There's one interesting thing to come out of Kentucky about this, and then we'll move on.
Yes.
So in 1989, Kentucky ruled that the school financial system was unconstitutional, which is kind of like weird. You wouldn't think that's coming out of Kentucky, but 1989 Kentucky was a Democrat stronghold. Don't forget that. 1989.
Can't forget what I didn't know in the first place.
Yeah, there you go. It's all right. I am just a computer up here with my political knowledge. So unconstitutional, and even directed it to become better. Not just the Kentucky Supreme Court didn't just say that it's unconstitutional because of its not equal across districts. It said that it's not good enough. You need more money to go to schools.
Yes.
And what this happened totally revamped Kentucky education and inspired the Kentucky Education Reform Act of 1990. And this was going to provide equal education to all across the whole state and increase how much money was going into it. Between 1992 and 2005, Kentucky rose from the 43rd spot in education into the country to the 34th. So that's some progress.
That's real.
That's real.
That's totally
That's
real.
what happens when you do some integration.
Yeah.
People love it. People love it. And I guess people not in Michigan.
Yeah.
I guess Michigan is in for integration.
Yeah, well, weirdly, some of the context here. So, okay, the case is Milliken v. Bradley.
Do you have the year on it? I don't have the year.
Think it's 73.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the year after Rodriguez.
Okay.
So it gives a lot of context about the difference in these segregation-based cases in the North versus in the South.
Very different.
And, like, in a way, because the South was so strongly and radically segregated.
Yeah.
It faced more opposition in the courts. Like, the courts were more focused on liberalizing it, on integrating things like its education, because it was actually codified into law.
So this is the differences of discrimination. Yeah. There are two types. There's de jure discrimination, which means by law, which is segregation, explicit government discrimination based off race. And then there's de facto segregation, or in fact segregation, which comes about not due to direct government action, but because of housing or other factors. And James Baldwin put it perfectly when he talked about de facto segregation. He said, blacks are separated, but nobody did it.
Yeah.
And that's where Milliken v. Bradley comes into play. Milliken. Yeah. Milliken Bradley comes into play. Blacks in Michigan are separated, but nobody did it.
So white flight starts happening in mass. And I think this is in the late 60s, early 70s, where black people start moving into the cities, and racist white people want to get away. And so highway building goes through the roof as the white people fly out to the suburbs, and black people maintain the largest proportion of population in the inner cities.
Right. And we can see Detroit is the example here.
Yeah.
In 1910, it was 1% black. In 1960s, it was 29% black. By 1970, it was 44% black.
Yeah.
And this is because of the Federal Housing Administration and the Veterans Administration giving out home loans that were they were not going to black families. They were only going to white families.
Yeah.
And then you talked about perfectly with the highway building.
Yeah.
Cuts communities right in half, destroys generational wealth and all that.
Exactly.
Not only that, they even had physical, actual barriers. They actually built a wall in 1941 called the 8 Mile Wall.
Yeah.
That literally separated the blacks from the whites in Detroit. So, like, the North isn't perfect. And that's what the liberal myth needs to die there. Like, the North was not this like civil rights bastion. It just wasn't.
No, the North, in my mind, the North was better basically purely by convenience, because the North was where cities existed and where the climate wasn't right to grow cotton.
Right.
And so you had slaves that you weren't working, doing hours of manual labor on the field, and you just had them serving you in the household. And because of that, we have this myth that Northerners were less racist than Southerners.
Yeah. So now we get into this how are we dealing with this white flight? What is it causing? And it's causing a decrease in property values in the inner cities of Detroit, causing a lack of school funding. So there's this Kerner Commission in 1968, and he was an advisor appointed by Lyndon B. Johnson, and he was trying to study the unrest going on in the country because there's a lot of riots going on in the late 60s. Kerner comes to the conclusion that our nation is moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal.
Yeah.
Which is a big thing to come out of the executive branch.
Definitely.
That's hard language.
Yeah. And so in that he kind of built on that to say that the nation this is exemplified best within our schools.
Yes.
They're becoming more and more separate, and that school integration was essential to the future of American society. Really, the only way to prevent this divide of black, white, rich, poor is to educate them together, because this is where we build the foundation of our population.
Yes.
So he recommends integration. And after this, a Detroit school board developed a sweeping integration plan. And it spurred a wave of organization from white parents to overturn it.
Yes. And people were furious. I mean, we're talking about white parents calling in bomb threats and threatening to kill the school board members. That's the vitriolic hatred that these people are portraying against the school board right now. Yeah. And against black people. That's the type of vitriolic fear they have of integration. Exactly.
So after these white parents organize, and they organize powerfully because of this anger, they pass a law, Public Act 48, which overturns the plan. And I think it does even more than overturn the plan.
The entire school board was recalled and was replaced by all anti-integrationists.
It was specifically anyone who supported the integration plan was removed from the board.
Unbelievable. Crazy.
Like, the extreme measures being taken, absurd. And so one of the parents of one of these black students in Detroit, I think it is, decides to take up a lawsuit against the state law, Public Act 48, which overturned the plan. And they partnered with the NAACP, which had to prove that Detroit's school segregation was de jure rather than de facto.
They needed to prove by law segregation.
Yes.
Which is very hard.
Yeah, but they did have pieces of evidence.
Right.
Like, there were practices in Detroit where black kids who went to overcrowded schools would be bussed out to other majority black schools, even though they had to be taken further than a white school would be.
No way.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's one of them that I have. It might be the only one that I have.
But that's great. That's such a great example. It's disgusting, but that's unbelievable.
Yeah. But it was kind of iffy because the thought was, even if the NAACP won, it wasn't clear how integration would be achieved.
Right.
Like, what is the implementation going to be? How much busing is going to need to happen? Like, do you need to involve multiple school districts across the metro area? And if you do, that's never happened before.
Because that never happened before. Because now the lawyers are suggesting, like, how if you want to actually integrate the schools, you need to bring suburban kids and inner city kids to the same school district. You can't do integration only in the inner cities because there's only black people in the inner cities. You can't do integration only in the suburbs because the suburbs are 98% white.
Yeah.
How are we going to mix them? We need to mix the school districts. We need to break the suburban-urban barrier.
Yes.
And that's what causes, honestly, the entire backlash. That's the real fear of these white parents.
Yeah.
Is the break of that urban-suburban barrier. And the judge that gets appointed to the case, Stephen J. Roth, he's the federal judge, and he was not a liberal by any means. He was not. He was a fairly conservative guy, but he went to a school in an integrated school system, and he was an immigrant. And, you know, he is recorded saying, like, I never understood segregation. It never made sense to me.
and he applauded the education that he got in the case.
Right.
Yeah, and he said he got a lesson himself on the importance of integration and the segregation that did exist in school systems. And because of that, he ruled in favor of the NAACP. And he held that they were being denied an integrated education, which was in violation of equal protection of the 14th Amendment. And he imposed an integration solution across the metro area.
Which is big.
He really did the most extreme liberal decision that could have been made. As far as he said, we need integration. And I think he specifically mentions that borders between school districts are not sacrosanct, is the word he used.
That's what he said. They don't overrule like 14th Amendment protections.
Exactly.
That's not what happens. Now, he says that every school needs to be about 70% white, 30% black. Yes. And then how you achieve that is through busing kids to different areas of the metro area, to get that proportional representation of the races. And Ruth gets brutalized by the white population. We're talking about intense death threats.
Yep.
And a policeman was even recorded saying, this is a policeman. He said, I'd go to jail before my kids go to Central High School in Detroit.
Yeah.
And now again, I want to emphasize how racism was baked into this. Because in 1972, George Wallace ran for president in the Democratic primary. And George Wallace was the governor of Alabama. George Wallace is the guy who said segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. And he won this district in Michigan during the Democratic primary. So, and he ran on this anti-busing, anti-integration platform, and it won in Michigan. And knowing that George Wallace was able to make his career out of this and make it work from Alabama to Michigan is really impactful of how deep racial animosity is in the country. And again, I it's only 50 years ago. My parents were born. This isn't old news. This is not ancient. It's not gone away.
No.
And it's sad to see people assume that it's gone when it's honestly so close in our national memory. And it still so affects people every day.
Yeah.
You know? So Ruth rules in favor. We get the most liberal option. And now we got to go to the Supreme Court.
Of course.
Of course.
And you know how the story ends.
Because it's always bad news.
Yeah. Yeah. Once again, 5-4. Same split of justices as it was in the Rodriguez decision. So the court overturns Roth's decision, and I think it's Powell again writing the decision, right?
Yes. And Powell says, nothing is more important than the local control of the schools. Nothing is more important. Literally nothing is more important. Education isn't more important than local control of the school systems.
The Equal Protection Act to the 14th Amendment isn't more important
than local control of the schools. Are our district lines so sacrosanct that they're more important than the 14th Amendment of the Constitution? Please.
Yeah, and it mirrored the point made by the California person you talked about earlier. I don't remember what their position was in terms of what Berger said. Specifically said that white suburban districts had done nothing to deserve this ruling. They shouldn't be burdened with integration like this, right?
Is integration a burden now?
Exactly.
It's just depressing. It's depressing, but it mirrored the Rodriguez decision. And in both cases, local control wins out. And he again emphasizes, if Fortas was there, this wouldn't have happened. He again makes that point, and he's emphasizing this. And then he makes his point again when he talks about when he talks about the news coverage. He cites the Wall Street Journal's headline saying that the federal government was defending local control of school districts. How accurate that is of the media representation of the case of the time, I'm not really keen to say.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? The Wall Street Journal has been a right-wing newspaper forever. So it makes sense that they would publish something against it.
Definitely.
Was that the media consensus? I don't know. I don't know. But Milliken ended the Brown era. That's what's really important. It ended the Brown v. Board era. The Brown era was just a consensus, a Supreme Court consensus around integration. And having that consensus was strong. Having a united Supreme Court that was going to say, we are pro-integration around every turn was a very important aspect of integration success. It gave it legitimacy. And Milliken being shot down in the way Brown wasn't was the end of that unanimous consent and the end of integration as we knew it. And the integration project of America would now be halted from this point forward. Integration was over. However we got, that's what we got. And if anything, it's going to get worse from now on.
They literally end up reversing it. And this kind of is further on, but there was a case called Board of Education of Oklahoma City v. Dowell.
Yeah.
That released states from their desegregation orders with the contingency that if they had taken practicable steps to eliminate segregation, they wouldn't have to follow those orders.
By 2009, 45% of schools were released of their desegregation orders.
I had no idea.
I had no idea
that was the case. And see, this is where I wonder if we don't get more information on the results of that. Because I think he vaguely says something about it had real results without citing any statistics or studies. And so I wonder what those results were. I wonder whether states actually actively went backwards after being released from the desegregation orders. Or if what I'm sure the argument is that these orders are no longer needed.
Right.
They've taken the practical steps. Are they kind of home free?
Well, the one stat that I would cite that he does mention in here near the end, he says in 1970, the average black student went to a school that was 32% white. By 2009, it was 30%.
Yeah.
So he's saying that by removing the integration orders, we're having a decrease in the amount of integration.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, but again, I have trouble reading that stat, actually.
It's just so minimal.
It's minimal, but also I don't know if I know what it means. The average black student was in a school that was 32% white.
Yeah. So what it means is there is a smaller percentage of white people in 2009, 2010 in the schools that black people are in than there was in 1970 and 1971.
Right. And it's only a 2% difference.
It's a 2% difference over 40 years, and they're very specific years.
Yes.
Seems
right.
My stats alarm is.
I know. I don't like this at all. I don't like that stat. No. I almost didn't even want to talk about it after I read it because I was like, that seems not only nitpicky, it also seems like, depending on your sample size, that might not be a significant result.
It seems like you're reaching, it seems like the type of thing that Cohen starts searching for online. It's like, what can I use to support this point?
It's like when you're in a paper and you're like, when you're writing a paper for school and you Google evidence to support my claim.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That's how I feel when I read that.
Yeah.
So I don't agree with that stat that he cites. And he doesn't, I guess his other argument is showing the Kentucky example. And it's showing that Kentucky's... No, but that's not what you're suggesting.
No, because that's not integration. That's equality of funding.
Right. That's equality of funding. That's not integration.
Yeah.
That's not integration.
Yeah, I guess he doesn't really get at... Or no, he does have some specific examples of... Okay, so he talks about a survey of families whose children were bused to achieve racial integration.
Right.
And... the survey found that 54% of parents said the experience was very satisfactory, 33% said it was partly satisfactory, and only 11% said it was not satisfactory. So you get this point that, okay, at least from one perspective, the parents of children who have busing to achieve racial integration, even this, it's iffy because it's almost too specific.
Yeah, it's
how was the busing experience? That's what we're really answering.
Are you busing experience? I know a lot of parents were afraid that their kids were going to be on the bus for an hour at a time.
Sure.
Were they happy to see that? Oh, they actually only have to be bused 15 minutes. I'm pretty happy with that outcome. Yeah. Rather than talking about the racial aspect of it.
Exactly. It's not. It's not talking about how they feel about integration of education.
Right. So that is kind of difficult to quantify. And he doesn't make a good job of it.
No.
But,
No. I mean, theoretically, I would assume that integration does help education.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to pretend that the book does a good job of really making that point. I mean, honestly, the biggest thing I would believe is the Kerner report that we talked about.
Yeah, that's the thing that I would really. But the Kerner report also comes, I feel like, from a place of social cohesion rather than academic success, which I think social cohesion might be better for academic success. I think a society that is more united with their ethnicities is going to be just a better society overall and a better learning environment.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
With less racial animosity generally.
Yeah, and I think the idea is that because the funding disparities align with the racial disparities as far as location so much, that if you are integrating racially, you're going to be integrating
economically too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I mean this is a point that I've often thought about, is that targeting based on socioeconomic statuses will address the problems of racial disparities, except in a more specifically targeted way. Which isn't to say like I don't support something like affirmative action, which targets based on race, because I still think that's a very good corollary factor. But I think like the root of the issue is the money. Right.
That's the root of the issue. The root of the issue is the state discriminated on Black people to not get money.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's the root of the problem.
Yes.
So let's run through a couple more of these Supreme Court cases that happened throughout the 70s and early 80s and into the 2000s. And so 1978, we have Regents of University of California v. Bach, and this was a positive outline on education. This was when affirmative action was upheld. 1978, affirmative action was upheld.
Yeah.
We're in 2023. Might get taken away.
Exactly.
So I mean, insanity.
We've been talking about how we had the progressive Warren Court in the 50s and 60s, and then it went backwards, or again, from our perspective. Yeah. Starting in the 70s, so it doesn't completely surprise me that it might still be going backwards.
Exactly. We even got another case in 1982. Plyer v. Doe. This expanded the rights of immigrant students, and this actually shocked me. Yeah. They were challenging a Texas law that was denying state funds to schools that were serving quote-unquote illegal immigrants. Powell actually supported the liberals in a 5-4 decision, and they did not classify education as a fundamental interest, but they did say it was important. And I think this is shocking, because if you were to ask conservatives right now in this country, should illegal immigrants have access to public elementary, middle, and high schools? I think the answer would be no.
I agree.
I don't think conservatives nowadays would be in favor of illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants or residents being able to go to our public schools. This is a shift. This is a rightward shift since the 80s.
Yeah.
I think it's unique.
I mean, I don't want to get too far on this tangent, because I feel like this is something that I probably have too much in my head about, of the specific anti-immigration shift happening as a response to globalization in the 90s. So I can see where that's coming from.
Yeah, I can see that immigration was not as big of a problem yet. This was still a very much majority white country.
Yeah,
you know,
and it wasn't, because of globalization kind of skewed towards, oh, the immigrants are coming to take my jobs, or the immigrants are taking my jobs across the ocean somewhere. That wasn't as front of mind at this point.
Right. That wasn't happening yet. Yeah. You know, so now we get back into the bad news, and one that actually blew my mind. Yeah. Kadramas, is that her name?
Yeah. I don't know a better way to pronounce it.
Kadramas v. Dixon. This was a poor rural family. The Kadramas were a poor rural family in North Dakota. And this North Dakota school district was charging students to get the transportation necessary to go to school. It was $97 a year to ride the school bus. So June 1988, the court ruled against Kadramas by 5-4. And O'Connor wrote the opinion. She was the first woman on the court. She stated in her opinion that poverty was not a subject class and education was not a fundamental interest. So after all the fighting, all the decisions, all of the drama to try to get poverty as a protected class and try to get education as a fundamental interest, Kadramas v. Dixon says no to both.
Yeah.
Finally, forever, book is shut, move on, it is done.
Nail in the coffin.
And she says it is difficult to imagine that the Constitution required transportation to school for free. Is that so difficult to imagine, O'Connor? Is that so difficult to understand? Because you're having an unequal access to something that is so vital, but she says it's not a fundamental interest. So in her worldview, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, well, and this reminds me of something that we talked about, and I assume we will continue to talk about throughout this book, is the difficulty that this court has in eliminating kind of fees for any government services, because the idea is if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Yeah.
Right. And if states are required to give free transportation to anyone who needs it, again, does it mean they have to give free housing and free food and whatever else?
Where does that line end once you say that?
Yeah.
And I think the left knows that that's how that goes, and I think the right knows that's how that goes.
Yeah. Well, because it's hard to, like, education, I think obviously a fundamental interest.
Mm-hmm.
And even if not, like in these cases, they're making the statement that education is very important.
Yeah.
If education is very important, if it's a fundamental interest, how can you not say housing is? How can you not say food and water are?
How can you not say healthcare is?
Exactly. Right. So
what a different America we could have had.
Yeah. I see the fear of people who don't want the government to spend money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And so again, Marshall wrote the dissent, as he did always and amazingly.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that the 14th Amendment was supposed to abolish caste legislation. And this law obviously traps them in their current disadvantaged status, creating a discrete and permanent underclass. And that's what we're getting at a lot when we talk about unequal access to education and the just terrible, unequal opportunities. Kill me. We're talking for so long here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, the unequal opportunities that children have and how it makes it impossible or so much more difficult to get out of this situation. That's what you were talking about last time.
Exactly.
That unequal opportunity. And I think as Americans, we all believe in equal opportunity.
Yeah.
We all believe in that.
And that's why it's just a matter of aligning on the facts.
Yeah.
Like, it's about aligning on what is the situation we're currently in. Getting everyone to believe and understand that systemic discrimination is a thing, that it matters the amount of money that your family has when you grow up.
Exactly.
Right? Where you live when you grow up. These things are not within the child's control. And I think it comes down to even more like fundamental philosophical discussion of, I mean, maybe I brought this up last time, but like, how much free will do you really think a person has?
Right.
Like, there's so much evidence that our futures are so based on
our environment.
Yeah, the way that we start out, things that we just totally can't control. And so to me, it just seems like if that's the case, why don't we try to support as many people as we can, since it's not that people are just making bad choices and driving themselves into the ground. It's just that this is the environment they've grown up in.
And you can't expect everyone to beat the odds.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be the odds.
Yes.
You can't expect everyone to beat the odds, guys. Yeah. And so that's what it really comes down to. And when we look at dropout rates, we 11% of kids drop out in the lower class of America, 5% in the middle class, and 2% in the upper class. Guys, if not finishing school and education isn't a part of being in poverty, why does that stat exist?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be happening like that. It would be equal across all the different social economic stratas if it didn't have to do with their poverty rates.
Yeah.
So please. And what's so gross is that this charging fees for transportation still happens. It happened in Massachusetts in 2008 after the recession. In some districts, it's $500 a year. And in some states, schools use professional bill collectors, guys going to collections for a guy trying to declare bankruptcy had a collections agency hounding him for school transportation costs.
Yeah.
Just unreal.
Yeah. Just, it feels icky.
That feels icky.
Yeah. And
that feels icky.
The last one I feel like is important to talk about because of the hypocrisy that ends up being illuminated.
Right.
So this
it's a perfect close to the book.
Yes, to the chapter.
To the chapter. That's what I mean. Yeah, it's a perfect end of the chapter.
So the case is parents involved in community schools v. Seattle School District number 1. And this specifically barred localities from implementing their own education, their own integration strategies, which just feels ridiculous and unnecessary. But there were examples in the Seattle metro or Seattle and in metropolitan Louisville, Kentucky, who had put programs into place without any court telling them to. Mm-hmm. It was purely based on the choice of the locality, and the court said that they couldn't do this. They ruled 5-4 that voluntary plans of integration violated the Equal Protection Clause. How nuts is this? They're using the clause in the 14th Amendment that is meant to ensure equal treatment by the government of these specific classes. And in attempting to do this on their own, for these mm-hmm. localities to do this on their own, the justices say that using race as a reason to bus kids to different school districts to integrate them is basically equivalent to discriminating based on race. They're saying like what Brown v. Board did, that is these local decisions are specifically going against that.
Right. And it makes no sense because the Brown v. Board decision was specifically to normatively and progressively, when I say progressively, I don't mean the political ideology, I mean actively take schools and integrate them.
Yes.
Based off their races.
Yes.
And now we're saying race to promote diversity was no different from using race negatively to create segregated schools. That is the exact opposite of what we meant by the 14th Amendment. That's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
So local control was suddenly not honored. Who cared?
Yeah, of course. That doesn't matter.
Local control? What?
No. Ridiculous.
What? You're trying to help black people? Get out of here. Local control. Give me control. You know?
Yeah.
Icky.
Just,
it's icky.
Sad,
bad. The last stat I'm going to say, and then I think we can button up the book club section, is University of California, Berkeley was studying states that increased funding for poor schools and states that didn't. And the 26 states that increased funding and the 23 states that didn't, how did they compare? States that directed money to poor students saw better test scores, and it had a larger impact than smaller class sizes in the early grades. And this comes to a lot. People say more money doesn't mean better results. Sure, man, but it's correlated and we can give it a shot.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It might not be the perfect causation here, but please, we know that giving more money, you'll get more resources.
Yeah.
You'll
better teachers.
Yes.
Come on. What else are you supposed to do? Sure, you can make structural changes, but those can only go so far.
Have you considered asking kids to do their homework? Have you considered that? Unreal. Okay. So that is the book club section.
Indeed.
Next week? Yeah. Next week, we're going to be talking about campaign finance, which is going to be interesting for sure.
Yes. Ooh, excited to talk about Citizens United.
I know. We'll see how far it gets until we get in there. I'm kind of curious to see how campaign finance was going in the 70s and 80s. Like, I don't know enough about it. You know,
I have no idea.
I'm going to be learning a lot here. And I hope you guys learn a lot too. Go read the book somewhere. All right. Hooray. We're not partnering with them or anything. It's just a good book.
No. Yeah, it is. It's interesting.
It is interesting. Cool. All right. Now we're about to get into some deep shit.
Yeah, this is going to be crazy.
We have become like almost, I want to say like we've become experts on semiconductors right now.
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. Otherwise, we're going to really embarrass ourselves right now.
Well, one thing I'll say to the audience real quick is in the experience of like educating ourselves on this stuff, one thing that I think both of us have very clearly experienced is the phenomenon of learning more leading to this overwhelming feeling of how little you actually know.
Yes.
Like I am learning so much more, and it emphasizes to me how much I am only scratching the surface.
Exactly. I feel that way all the time.
Yeah.
I haven't, honestly, that's why I love this podcast, is because I haven't felt that way in a while.
Yeah.
I've been out of school for a bit. I haven't had this like intellectual itch as much. You know, I haven't had like, honestly, I've had the itch, but I've had nothing to scratch it.
Yes.
And this is like scratching it.
Totally.
And I'm just getting deeper and deeper into all these different aspects of our political economy and geopolitics. I'm like, I didn't know I was going to be watching an 1.5-hour lecture about semiconductors, taking notes, and then reading 4 different papers about the CHIPS Act.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was going to be doing that on Monday, but here I am.
Here you are.
Okay.
So
where do you want to start with semiconductors?
okay, so well, first I'll just give the context.
Yeah.
So
what are we going to be talking about?
We're talking about what has honestly turned into a chip war.
Yes.
Between the United States and China. I guess the overview to give here is semiconductors have kind of been identified as the newest, most important currency for economy, for industry in general, but specifically for military application.
Yeah.
What I've read about too is there's this idea that AI is going to become more and more important in military applications. This is something that President Xi of China, Chairman Xi of China believes. This is something that the Biden administration and officials in the U.S. government believe. It's pretty much a consensus.
I was reading the foreign policy website today, Foreign Policy Magazine, and 5 articles on their front page were about AI.
Yeah.
5 of them.
It's huge. Semiconductors are a major part, are absolutely essential for doing AI computing. It's a lot of high-level computing. There are a lot of operations that have to happen, and you want them to be done fast. Yes. So having the highest-end semiconductors to do those things are very important.
And when we're talking about these semiconductors, on each semiconductor is on these high-end ones that are being produced now is 15 billion transistors.
Yes.
And that is so the 15 billion transistors are on your main chip on your iPhone that you're probably listening to this on right now.
Yeah.
15 billion transistors. And computation is done through all of this. That's how all these decisions, that's how your phone is operating, right? And these transistors are smaller than the size of the coronavirus. That's how tiny these are.
Yeah.
So imagine the machines that you need to move little electronic particles that are smaller than the coronavirus.
Yeah.
How precise do you have to be? How specialized do these industries have to be? And we're going to get into that.
Yeah. It's extremely a lot would be the answer.
Extremely a lot.
Extremely a lot specialized. That's what I would say. But because of the complexity that you're talking about here, the supply chain for semiconductors is one of the most tangled, complex things that exists.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's this competition building up between China and the United States, but more broadly, the West. And what happened I don't know where exactly to start, because you mentioned something about how this might have started as early as the 70s.
Yes, it started in the 70s.
Yes.
So you want me to give that background a little?
Sure. I feel like there's so much for us to get into.
Yeah. Let's build it up with some really long back historical context.
Yes.
So during the Cold War, it's really a fight for technology. And the Soviets are kind of the first to realize this. And the Soviets realize that we don't have the tech America has, and we're screwed. And the main thing they identify as their biggest issue is computational power. And the Soviets realize this, that they don't have the computational power that the United States has, and that the United States is going to destroy them in this war if they don't figure out how to get more computational power. There was a knowledge gap in the Soviet Union. And what's important to recognize here is that there was no knowledge gap. The Soviet Union had great physicists, it had great universities. The knowledge was fine. There was a production gap. And the United States didn't know this yet. The United States didn't know they had this ace up their sleeve against the Soviets, because the Soviets were able to identify their own weaknesses before America could identify its strengths. Once America did identify its strengths, it leaned into it, and it leaned into it hard. So what are the ingredients of good computing? You need a good budget. You need a lot of money. You need good physicists. You need a lot of those. You need a good military industrial complex. So what's confusing is that the Soviets had all of these, but they were not able to build good computing hardware. And the issue was the lack of global cooperation. And the biggest issue is local specialization that makes it possible from each area to get really good at one thing.
Yeah.
Because trying to be good at everything makes you average at everything. And you're not going to make the chips that go into your iPhone if you're just average. You need to be the best. And what America is able to do is leverage their position on the world and go to all these different countries that we'll get into and say, specialize in one thing and we'll be bros for life.
Yeah.
We'll never leave you. And now China is now in the place of the Soviets.
Yes.
China has to try to do this on their own.
Yes. I will say, I think China is probably more aware of the situation than the Soviets are.
Yeah. And I think they're in a better position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This happened in the 70s with the Soviet Union and the US, and the Soviet Union just ended up being unable to catch up.
Yeah.
I would say chips came back to the forefront in 2018 with this export restriction on the Chinese company ZTE.
Okay.
So ZTE was I think it was a telecom company, something. It was caught selling equipment to Iran.
Yeah.
Which was a big no-no in US law. And so ZTE was blocked from buying any US equipment, which completely halted its production. It was a multi-billion-dollar company, and it literally couldn't do anything once it didn't have access to US chips in 2018. And it was actually only saved by a personal, like, one-on-one conversation between Trump and Xi at the time, where Xi asked him to lighten up on the sanctions a little bit. So this triggered a huge realization in China. They were like, okay, US is going to block our access to their chips technology. We need to start preparing for this. And they start doing a lot. Okay, so it does research into semiconductor choke points, and the government publishes a paper of like 36 specific choke points that China wants to shore up as far as production that can happen within their country nationally. They also begin stockpiling U.S. equipment in anticipation that the U.S. is going to up its sanctions.
That stockpile is necessary because we talked about last time about stuff in the South China Sea, how much trade comes through China, how much, especially with their computational stuff and their computer parts, how much of it comes from abroad. They need to like in-house as much of it as possible for the moment that, okay, well, we no longer have access to global markets. At least we have 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah, which is extremely significant. Especially when, I mean, you were talking to me before the pod about the projection that it might take 4 to 10 years for China's production to catch up with America's. If they can cut some of that gap out with stockpiled equipment, they're looking much better. Right.
If you say, okay, it's going to take us 7 years to develop the things we need to build these chips, but we have a stockpile of 3. That's good.
Yeah.
And what you can accomplish in those 3 years, I'm assuming the only way that we're going to the only thing that's going to like totally stop all chips going into China is going to be through like some type of military conflict. So that's 3 years, the China has now.
Yeah.
With the parts that they need still,
Yeah, definitely. So in addition to that response, China steps up its industrial policy to support the chip industry. Just pours a ton of money from the government into chip companies to hopefully help them address these choke points. But at least what I read is that China's challenge here like cannot be overstated, to make even one piece of the advanced manufacturing equipment locally is extremely difficult and costly. And so for this particular choke point, I'm talking about the equipment that is used to make the chips,
Yes.
the really small chips. It's extremely difficult and costly to design and create one piece of that equipment. One piece of that equipment doesn't do anything for them. They need a full set to actually be able to manufacture these chips alone. So you're compounding that difficulty massively.
Yes. And I want to get into how difficult we're talking about here. I want to go into the process of making a chip. So no other industry in the world is defined as strongly as the chip and semiconductor industry as monopolies. By monopolies. By monopolies. The monopolies in the chip industry are unbelievable. So what's the first thing you need? You need software. 3 companies specialize in chip design, and they're all based in the United States.
Yeah.
Only 3, and they're all in the US. Now, general design. Only a couple of companies have the expertise. For PC processors, there are only 2 companies in the world that do this. Training AI systems in complex data centers, only 1. Manufacturing machine tools is what you're getting at. Machine capable of depositing. We're talking about a machine that is capable of depositing a film of material atoms thick with perfect uniformity. It's the most complex machine tool ever produced in the history of humanity, and it's called extreme ultraviolet lithography. It shoots photons through a mask that is used to pattern transistors onto the chip and fastens them by the heat of the UV ray.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
So cool.
It used to be done with visible light, but it was too broad of a tool. Visible light was too broad of a tool. Think about that. It's unbelievable. And so again, this is too much science for me. I don't know all the context behind this, but this is insane. Okay. Ultraviolet is close to X-ray level, and it's 13.5 nanometers. And to do this, to make this machine tool, they have created the thinnest mirrors humans have ever made to bounce the ultraviolet light off, gaining its strength that then what is it?
Like sticks it, like
Sticks
sears.
it. Yes, sears it.
Yeah.
Sears the transistor onto the chip. Each one of these machines is $150 million, and it needs several 747s to move it. And it's monopolized by one company in the Netherlands.
Wow.
One company can produce this. $150 million each. Not only that, it needs to be serviced. It needs to be serviced multiple times a year. Unreal. So then the next one, this is the last one, materials. You need silicon, which isn't that hard, and certain gases. And they need to be so pure. This is insane again, okay? The gases need to be so perfectly pure because the random variation in the atoms causes defects in chip manufacturing. So you need to account for every other possible externality. It is so tiny. We're talking about the random variation of atoms. Causes defects in the process. China does not have this chemical capability. Only Japan does. All these bottlenecks you're talking about are so monumental to conquer. Asking Japan to become this chemically purifying expert, asking Dutch companies to create the most thinnest mirrors you've ever seen in your life, asking Americans to know how to design these PC processors, that's hard for one country to do. And now where America's strength is that it's developed this string of allies.
Yes. The alliances are one place to talk about. I was going to start with what the U.S. can do on its own.
Oh, let's do that.
Because it has a stranglehold over multiple of these choke points as far as American companies.
Yes.
So, and there's one thing that we can maybe talk about first is the most obvious move that the Americans have made on this is the CHIPS Act. Which ramped up American industrial policy about regarding chips. So this was passed in 2021, I think, maybe 22.
I don't remember.
Allocated $52.7 billion for the semiconductor industry to bring supply chains back into the U.S. The context here is specifically, in my opinion, with regards to fear over a Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
Yes.
Because one of these monopolies and I think it's specifically on the manufacturing.
TSMC.
Yeah, of these highest end chips. It's literally this company does 92% of the manufacturing worldwide of the highest end chips. Is TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Company. And so the US wants to bring some of that manufacturing capability back on our shores. But as you just talked about, it's an incredibly involved process, which takes construction of massive facilities as well as highly trained specialists. And to start out, so TSMC has actually signed up because of the subsidies of the CHIPS Act to build one of these manufacturing facilities in Arizona. They're not going to be able to run that with American workers. No. They're going to be flying Taiwanese workers in to train American workers and then flying them back.
And now, even what they're building in Arizona, it's not a high-end chip facility. It's not. It's not what they're doing in Taiwan.
Oh,
it's not that capable.
Okay.
It's like if what they're doing in Taiwan is 10 out of 10, they're going to produce like a 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 facility.
Okay.
It's not going to be able to replicate what they're doing in Taiwan.
I didn't know that.
It's not that capable.
Okay.
And so what America is trying to do with the CHIPS Act, I think, is bring home the assembly portion of as much as you can. Bring home the assembly portion. Because you cannot bring back the machine tools from the Dutch. You cannot bring back the chemical aspects from the Japanese. You can't. But you can try to bring back the assembly aspect.
Yes.
Which is good for the local economy, for jobs. And it's good in the case of war.
Yes, because right now a ton of that assembly is done in China.
Right.
And a lot of it is done by international companies, which to me hints that maybe it's going to be a little bit easier for the US to reshore that kind of manufacturing capacity.
You want to keep China, where we want China to be is on the low-level assembly of the iPhones, assembly of the laptops.
Yes.
We don't want them assembling the chips that go into the iPhone. We just want you to put the chips together and plug them in. We don't want you in the process. We want to assemble the chip.
Yes. We want them stuck at the lowest value added points of the supply chain.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. You want them adding the least amount of value to the electronics industry.
Yeah. And so the CHIPS Act pours a lot of money in. Honestly, this is not where most of my knowledge is. Most of my knowledge comes later last year, October 7th.
Okay.
I don't know if you know this date. So Biden signs an executive order, a policy update that's kind of adding on to chips that I read this report about the U.S. dominating 4 choke points of the chip manufacturing supply chain for very important choke points. And this executive order implements specific actions to restrict China's access to our supply of all of these different choke points. So there are a few different ways it plans on doing this. One is by choking off China's access to high-end chips. So again, like I said before, we've come to this realization that high-end chips, which supply our AI computing tools, are going to be enormously important to military operations moving forward. So we don't want these to be in Chinese military technology. We have made efforts to prevent sales of American technology to the Chinese military before. They haven't worked because we've allowed sales to Chinese companies, to Chinese industry to persist. But of course, the Chinese economy,
going right to the PLA.
Yeah, it's so directly married to the Chinese government that of course it makes its way into those into that equipment. So what this first provision does is it sets a performance threshold of the chips that we can sell to China. It sets that at 14 nanometers. And so this is describing how much space can be between the transistors.
Yeah.
Right? 14 nanometers it's a pretty good chip, but right now the best chips are at like 2 nanometers.
I don't even know if that's enough to run an iPhone.
I don't know if it is either.
I don't know if that is. Okay.
Yeah, it might. I think it's specifically like a slight downgrade to what China can can currently do.
Okay. That makes sense.
So part of this policy is specifically meant to move them backwards. It's not even just to maintain what they have right now.
It's brutal.
Yeah. So specifically, this blocks NVIDIA and AMD as two major companies that produce higher end chips than this. And it also is important in its block of NVIDIA because their software ecosystem, which is called CUDA, makes it much easier for programmers to write software for massively parallelized chips.
Oh.
Without CUDA, companies have to solve their own problems by coding for the environment that NVIDIA creates on their own, which is a billions-dollar investment, years of investment that NVIDIA has put into it. NVIDIA accounts for 95% of AI chip sales in China because of this stranglehold on the software industry. And unsurprisingly, something that I actually just read today is at the recent NVIDIA, like the NVIDIA CEO gave a speech recently about the importance of the Chinese market and how the US should loosen export controls so that they can access it.
Wow.
Of course, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, of course
not. That makes a ton of sense. So this is the first step of the process. Block export of these high-end AI chips.
Mm-hmm.
But this could have opened a massive opportunity for Chinese companies to build their own AI development environment as an alternative to CUDA, which leads to the second part of the policy, which is blocking China's access to US-made chip design software and US-made chip manufacturing equipment.
We were just talking about how the chip design software is based in the United States, and there's only 2 companies that do it.
Yes. So the design software is called EDA, Electronic Design Automation. There's 3 leading companies.
Okay, maybe it's 3.
Doesn't matter. They're all American companies, or at least most of their operations are done in America.
Mm-hmm.
This software has, with the new executive order, faces a presumed ban on sale to parties of concern, China. So basically, you need to apply to sell it to a party of concern. It's almost never going to go through.
Right.
It also adds another layer. In addition to a current ban, it's going to say, okay, let's say maybe Chinese companies had already bought the software before the ban or they pirated it. They can't have their chips manufactured anywhere with American technology.
Wow. Oh, so that's everything.
It's everything.
That's all of them.
It is. It's all of them. And the U.S. is invoking what's called the Foreign Direct Product Rule.
Oh, I have that here.
Yes, to prevent that. So that chips can't be manufactured. Companies outside of China cannot manufacture chips designed on EDA software from Chinese companies, or they can't be built by U.S. equipment, which is currently used by every semiconductor manufacturing operation in the world.
Crazy.
So what this is doing is it's not only making it hard for China, it's really scaring any of these other companies from accepting Chinese designs,
right?
And like using them as clients.
Right. They don't even want to touch China because now the United States has poisoned Chinese involvement.
Yeah.
And now if they do that, it's like almost having to pick a side.
Yes.
And it's like, do I want to be on the side of China or the United States? Who has the more political influence right now? The United States. Why would I go with the loser? Yes.
In the United States, who has these alliances, these closer relationships with the Netherlands,
yes,
Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. Yeah. It's a no-brainer. If companies don't abide by this rule, they risk losing their own access to U.S. equipment, which I just said and will continue emphasizing is the only equipment that there is.
Yes.
I had a quote from this report, which I really liked. It says, to state it bluntly, these recent actions are designed to put the roughly 28 Chinese chip design and supercomputing firms on the parties of concern list out of business. They are trying to eliminate the AI chip manufacturing that is happening in China. But there is yet another way that China could still evade these rules to try to make their own chips. They could design chips in China with an older or pirated EDA software and then manufacture the chips in China using older tech.
Okay.
The Biden administration prepared even for this contingency in blocking China from manufacturing advanced chips by choking off access to US-built semiconductor equipment. So this is the part that we already got into a little bit. US has a huge dominant position in the manufacturing equipment. And this dependency, like you were talking about, it's not just a one-time need for products.
Right.
It's a constant need for support.
Yeah.
And you need support to be on site, providing advice, being able to look at the equipment, troubleshooting problems, repairing equipment. So these rules dramatically restrict U.S. provision of manufacturing equipment to China. They specifically are targeting technology to make only the highest end chips, which I think is partly a strategic move so that China isn't too encouraged to develop their own high-end farms, that Chinese companies that are doing semiconductors are like, okay, we can still make pretty good semiconductors.
Right.
We can make the best on the Chinese market, which
that's a great point.
Is all that matters.
Right, because they're only going to be interacting with the Chinese market anyway.
Yes.
Right.
And that was a huge concern of the author of this, or a concern cited by the author of this report is like, you're worried that you're just going to galvanize the creation of a highly advanced industry in China.
Right. What if we're accelerating their process of decoupling from us?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
One of the things I was looking at was with the Dutch company and those UV light things that we were talking about. Yeah. I think there's 117 in the world. And no, I think one service guy, I don't remember what it was, one service guy, whatever, helped service 117 throughout his life. And he knew where 115 of them were. Wow. Because you need so much on-site support. You need to have so much interaction. The companies know where they all are. There's no like getting around it. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And there's so few people with this knowledge. And that's what that goes to show.
And then there's the last point, which I think you're about to hit, the specialization of American labor that isn't allowed to be in China anymore.
Yes.
Right? If you're an American citizen, you are not allowed to work in China in this industry. You had to either give up your citizenship or come home. Yeah. And everyone chose to go home.
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
And so overnight, China lost a lot of their specialized labor pool that came from America. Yeah. And they lost all of that. And that's not something that can be made up.
No.
You can't learn this stuff from a textbook or a blueprint. You need hands-on experience. You need a guy to fly out and show you how to run it. You need Taiwanese workers from TSMC to fly to Arizona to teach American workers.
Exactly. And the last place that Taiwanese workers from TSMC are going to want to go is mainland China. Yeah. To help them develop their semiconducting capacity. Okay. So do I have anything else on this?
Did we have a fourth bottleneck?
I think I have the fourth bottleneck, which is U.S. manufactured components for semiconductor equipment. So it's just further up in the supply chain, right? It's like you build components or you build equipment for the manufacturing machines, but you need components, which is also dominated by the U.S. So they're blocking China from purchasing the U.S. manufactured components. And so at this point, like if you assume that all of these restrictions work perfectly, you are literally like forcing China to rebuild the American semiconductor industry's cumulative advances of about 70 years because they've just been so reliant on our tech and they've been building with it forever. And
what's so interesting is we have been reliant on China for all of our low value added stuff. All of our plastic toys, all of the assembly aspects of our electronics, all the low value added. We've kept the high value add in very strategically tied countries to us, which is and I want to talk about that a little more in depth. Yeah. But before we do, I want to talk about how are these choke points of how us stopping these four bottlenecks, how is that going to impact China? So there should be a massive impact in the next 1 to 3 years. But China, as we have already said, has stockpiled a lot of chips and a lot of these components in anticipation for these controls. But as these stockpiles begin to dry up, it's going to start having less and less advanced chips. And that's when this 4 to 10 year time frame comes in. China will begin to have access to alternative supplies and components for these things to produce these chips within 4 to 10 years. Other small countries not locked in a battle for global hegemony will find ways to get around the U.S. export controls and getting tools to China. That's what the author is suggesting. He's saying that a lot of these other countries that are going to start trying to develop their own specialized tools are going to make their way into China and not be so scared of the United States because they don't want to be the global hegemon anyway.
Exactly.
And companies... this is one I find interesting. Companies would aim to reduce the U.S. components so that they are only subject to the veto power of their home government and not the U.S. So remember how we were just talking about how you said if a tool has a U.S. component, the United States was going to, through the FDPR, say that you can't sell to China.
Yeah.
A lot of these companies are now going to be incentivized to remove the U.S. components and try to make their own so that they don't get affected by that. So that's the next trade-off. And he's calculating that into that 4 to 10 year time span. That's what he's calculating in there.
That makes sense.
I think it's more. I don't know if I agree. I don't think that China is going to have the capacity to make a completely in-home, domestic semiconductor industry. I don't buy it. I think that the United States has so effectively pulled the international allies into this chain. And against China, I don't see China being able to build it up.
Well, this is, to me, where it starts to become more of a chess match.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I read another report about the specific responses that China is taking or the ways they're trying to get around these U.S. export controls.
Okay.
Right? But there's so many angles to it because there's also this angle of like companies are seeing U.S. scrutiny that they're placing on China in the semiconductor industry, and they're getting cold feet.
Right.
They're getting nervous about operating there. Like Apple is one of these companies that has doubled down and doubled down and doubled down in China, and it's thinking about pulling out.
Well, it pulled out 10% of its investment over to Vietnam over the last year.
That makes sense. And I expect Vietnam to be, and I mean, this is, we have to talk about legacy, like larger types of chips as well that aren't the most advanced ones. That's where Vietnam kind of shares some of the production capacity with China, but where China also holds some power. That I'm gonna have.
That's
to
too
get
much.
to.
That's
no,
man.
I have stuff on that.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
You animal.
But
brain is coming out of your ears right now.
Yeah, I know. I'm fucking crazy. It's okay. No, where am I? Okay, so let's talk about what China's response is.
Yeah, that's what I want to hear.
First of all. So, I talked about how China already began to respond after the ZTE block, right, in 2018. So they're like, we need to start researching more, pouring more money into this. The problem is that's what started to spook foreign companies like Apple, and Qualcomm is also a company that completely withdrew from China after the increased government control, right? Here's the other thing. So China's industrial policy so this is one of its main responses is pouring money into its own industry. It works by picking winners in the industry. And it's been extremely bad at that, partly because of corruption. And this is one of the massive problems with a communist government structure is corruption often is rampant. They haven't chosen really any of the winners in its semiconductor industry. More than, I don't have this in my notes, but I read this. In 2022, before the October 7th, controls.
Okay.
3,400 Chinese semiconductor companies shuttered. They closed down. They failed. These are companies that, again, were supported by the government, but their production wasn't up to snuff. And this has kind of just been a pattern in their industrial policy in a lot of places. And it's not across the board. They've had success in electric vehicles. Huawei is one of the biggest telecom companies in the world.
Yep.
But as far as a percentage basis of success, it doesn't look good.
No.
Anyways, I just wanted to get that point
I read an article that was critical of the CHIPS Act for the reason that you were talking about, because the CHIPS Act is somewhat picking winners. Yeah. And the author didn't like that idea. I just thought that was interesting.
No, I can see that. It really, reading more about China and its government economic relation does really make me question how the government, like how governments in general should and can helpfully.
It depends how these companies get the money that's being offered by the government. It really depends. It depends on the vetting process.
Yeah. And so an interesting part of this is that this report talked about export controls or like export standards or something as the way to make successful industrial policy, because it's you'll you'll reward companies with money based on foreign buyers, foreign demand for their products, because you're like, okay, if it's a foreign buyer, they're definitely only going to want the highest end products from the country.
This makes sense.
But China can't do that because it's being blocked now, and all these countries don't want to buy from it specifically. They don't want to fund it. So they're kind of caught in this spiral. Anyways.
They have no metric to pick the winners.
Yeah. They can only do it themselves. Like, they can only set their own benchmarks.
Yeah, and that's hard. That's hard.
Exactly. But it has a much more, like, interesting and almost slimier tactics that it's using that I'm very interested in.
To pick the winners? Or where are we going with this?
No, this is just to retaliate to all of these U.S. export controls.
Okay.
So first of all, it wants to reduce its dependency on foreign markets.
Naturally.
Imports $350 billion worth of chips in 2022.
God, that's a nightmare.
It's crazy. It's an enormous amount of money. They want to deter American and foreign economic pressure by inflicting pain. They want to increase foreign dependence on China, because right now they're only dependent by demand. That's not exactly true. They have a little bit of power from these legacy chips that I talked about, which they do 9% of global production.
Wow.
And they have dominance over rare earth metal mining and refining, which is which is the earliest part of this supply chain. They do, I think, between 60 and 80% of refining of nickel, lithium. Those might be the only ones off the top of my head. I might be wrong about nickel.
No, but does America get their nickel and lithium from China?
Yeah. A lot of it.
That's a nightmare.
Yes. But the difference is China, like, the only reason the US has done that is because the political willpower to get it elsewhere hasn't happened. That's a part of the supply chain that definitely can be done.
Yeah, there's lithium deposits in South America and Australia.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow, look at that. We recently did a deal with Australia to get lithium out of their country. Unbelievable.
Yeah. And I actually just read an article about a Canadian company.
Yeah. Nickel. Canada is one of the largest nickel deposits in the world.
Yeah. So
that's amazing.
So this is happening. And honestly,
are we developing Americans' semiconductor industry right now at this table?
Creating knowledge. This is incredible. I know. As I was reading this, though, I was literally like, this is all moving so fast. There's so much happening in this space right now. This is something that we should probably try to bring up every week.
Yeah, I think this is big.
Yeah.
Because the whole fight, this chip war started 2018.
Yeah.
It's been 5 years.
You have so much to catch up on. And like so much to learn.
I know.
Yeah.
And it's the economic games that are at play here are just unbelievable.
And this is what this is exactly what I'm trying to get to. So China has a little bit of a hold in these two areas. Another thing that I wrote down about how this has begun is the Inflation Reduction Act from Biden has significant tax credits based on electric vehicle production made with minerals sourced in the U.S. or our other free trade partners.
Wow.
Specifically to stay away from China in that segment of the supply chain.
So you can only get EVs, electric vehicles, with their lithium batteries, with lithium not mined in China.
Exactly.
That's unbelievable.
Yes.
Wow.
Well,
wait a second.
Not you can't.
Hold on.
This is carrot.
Oh, this is carrot.
But yeah.
Okay, wait a second. But no, to qualify for the subsidy, you have to.
Exactly.
Okay, so you can still use it, but then your product won't qualify for the subsidy, which means that demand for it will be lower, so you won't do it. Okay, that's amazing. I'm actually shocked by how competent of an industrial policy and a response that is from the United States. Yeah. I'm shocked by the way that we're tying in the Canada, the Australia. We're tying these in already. Yeah. I just think that's incredible.
Well, and I've also, I didn't mention enough about the CHIPS Act. There's just so much going on.
No, there's so much.
This. The CHIPS Act prevents companies who take money from the CHIPS Act from building new manufacturing facilities in China or expanding additional ones with an investment of even an additional $100,000.
It's that low.
Which is nothing. Which is absolutely nothing.
I didn't know it was that low.
Yeah. So, and the U.S. government reserves the right to claw back money that they gave from the CHIPS Act if companies break those rules, which to me is important because we have talked, I don't know if on the pod, but privately, about stories of government subsidies being offered to companies like Amazon to build a massive headquarters or facility in Virginia and then never actually doing it, but still getting that money to do whatever they want. Yep. That can't happen with the CHIPS Act.
That's incredible.
Yeah. They were thorough, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. That's unbelievable.
Okay, I still haven't gotten to the meat of what I'm trying to do.
I know, because every sentence you say is so awesome, and
there's so much to dig into.
There's so much to talk about.
Okay, so China's tactics to strike back on these tight chokehold export controls. 1, evade them.
Right.
Smuggling chips. Like, you can do it in small quantities. It's very hard at the quantities needed for advanced AI computing, because you need so much of this computing power. China, however, it's attacking it from every angle it can. It's begun to crack down on consulting firms which ensure its companies' compliance with U.S. export regulations. What's more pressing, though, is China importing chips to its foreign subsidiaries and then allowing Chinese programmers to access the computing power via the cloud. This, to me, seems like one of the biggest gaps in the export controls.
That's crazy.
Like, Chinese companies that have operations in India, operations anywhere else, they can still have these chips, and they can, programmers who are still stationed in China can access the computing power via the cloud.
Yeah, that's a huge oversight.
Yeah. And the other thing is that Chinese companies can use lower quality chips that aren't that much lower quality. Like the 14 nanometer chips, you can make chips that aren't illegal and export them to China that are maybe a 10% reduction in quality, which, while obviously is something, it's still doable for them to work.
Well, you know
with.
what? This is really interesting because Blinken, I was watching his interview today after the meeting, and he said he talked about the holding back of semiconductors in the meeting.
Okay.
And he talked about it in the interview, and he said, we're going to build a very, very high fence around a small plot of land. And that small plot of land is the really, really high-tech chips, but they're going to build a high fence. That's what he's suggesting.
Yeah.
He's like, we're not going to stop them from accessing the whole field. That's not the point. But we're going to really limit their ability to get to this one specific point, and we're going to die on that hill. And I guess that's the 14 nanometer chip that he's referring to there.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And
but I don't know if that's enough. And what you're suggesting is you don't think it is.
I don't know if it is. I mean, I think this helps because really the most important thing that America is looking for here is like, make sure we stay ahead.
Right.
Make sure we have at least the best chips. If we can stay 5 years ahead, if we can stay 3-4 years ahead even, so that we have the highest end chips in our military equipment and we can supply our allies with the higher end military equipment. That's what matters. And China to always be lagging behind a little bit in that department. And plus we talked about the aspect of not wanting to promote Chinese companies to make their own really high-end AI developed chip.
Right. You don't want to push them off the edge and make them, really revamp their entire economy around it, even though they kind of are already. But
yeah, they're trying, but they're not succeeding very well.
Well, listen, China. This is another tangent, but China is going through an economic issue right now. Anyway, they've recently cut interest rates and lowered taxes right now in China.
Is this because of the real estate crisis?
It's slightly because of the real estate crisis.
Okay.
Yes, it's slightly because of the real estate crisis.
Yeah,
not entirely, but it's playing a portion.
Okay, more context that I want to give, background for the audience. We initially were going to do this deep dive into the Chinese economy as a whole. It was a ridiculous idea.
Just too much.
Just stupid for us to think we could do.
Yeah, I don't know. We're not smart enough for that.
No.
Or concise enough.
No.
How long is this?
I don't want to be concise.
No, concise is not fun.
No, exactly. And it was actually, the real estate crisis was the first thing I was looking into. And as I was seeing how deep I could get into that is when I texted Anthony and I was like, we need to narrow this down.
Yeah, we need to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Okay.
I want to talk about the allies first. Not first. I want to talk about the allies.
That's
if you have
perfect.
more.
It's the next thing I have.
That's amazing.
The next tactic that China has.
Our chemistry is just into it right now.
It's amazing. They want to divide the U.S. from its allies.
Yes.
They want to go to American allies like Japan, South Korea, and the Netherlands in hopes that they can get supplies from them.
And they want to work on this bilateral agreement structure that we were talking about last time in the South China Sea. They want to work with countries one-on-one. They don't want to work with the united front against China. They don't want the U.S., South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan all at the table. Taiwan wouldn't be at the table, but they don't want them all at the table. They want one at a time and try to pick them off one by one. And what America has done over the last 50 years has kind of been incredible with geopolitical maneuvering. In the 70s under Nixon, there was an incentive being built to take our electronics industries, these semiconductors, these chips productions, and take them across our allies in the Pacific to build up our dependence and our interdependence. And this wasn't just good from America's perspective. It was also good from the Asian nations' perspective. Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and Singapore all worked together and suggested to the United States that you should export a lot of, or onshore, a lot of your electronic stuff over to our countries and take parts of your semiconductor production and move them to us. That's what got Taiwan involved in the chip making process in the first place. Texas Instruments built a facility there in the 70s. And Taiwan's thought process was, okay, well, if Texas Instruments is here, the United States is going to defend us when China comes a-knocking. And same thing with Japan, same thing with Korea. Now, what's interesting, and what I think is the most important aspect of why America is so far ahead at this aspect is they've had the ability to say each country do one thing very well. Japan does the chemicals. South Korea does some other thing. Taiwan does the hardcore manufacturing. The Dutch make the parts and make the UV ray light machine, and the United States makes the software. And if we all do that together and we all focus on one thing really well, then we can all put it together in the end really effectively and don't have to become experts at everything. But that interdependence that's been created now is key to the national defense of a lot of these countries. And that's the geopolitical angle now for Korea, Japan, Taiwan. But now what do we want to get into the China, Taiwan, what the impact would be if China invaded Taiwan, or do you want to give it a second?
We can.
Okay.
I mean, we're all over the place already.
I know.
Fuck it.
Okay. So the question is asked, what happens if China takes Taiwan? What happens? What happens at this point? And I think it's important to talk about, like, does China taking Taiwan impact China's capability to produce more chips?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
No. The analysis I've heard on this, and I believe, like, we're talking about how much the knowledge matters for this.
Exactly.
And the one question I had is, like, I mean, could they just get the knowledge at gunpoint? And that is possible. That is a contingency that maybe hasn't been considered in much of what I've read. But I also kind of assume that the Taiwanese might hate the Chinese so much, and especially so much after being invaded, that it might be difficult. I wouldn't put it past the Chinese to torture them for information.
Oh, yeah.
But it wouldn't be easy.
No.
At the very least.
I was looking at some war games between Taiwan and the United States, and the war games all played out the same way. The United States bombed all the facilities.
In Taiwan?
Yeah.
Wow.
The second China took it, all the war game experts bombed the facilities right away.
That's crazy.
First thing they did.
That means no one gets the chips.
No one gets it. That's the first thing the war games did every time.
Wow.
Every time. They replayed it like 8 scenarios, 8 different generals. They all did the same thing.
Wow.
Just destroy them.
How? I'm trying to imagine how I would react to that.
It's terrible for humanity.
Yeah, well, it's an attack on someone who's supposedly a partner.
Well, yes, but, you know, it would be like with TSMC's consent, pretty much. It's like, listen, okay. You know what I mean? It's not like we're going to kill the Taiwanese people that are in there. We're going to tell TSMC, like, get all your guys out. Sure. We're about to destroy it.
Okay. That's more okay. I'm fine with that.
But that's what all the war games did.
That's wild.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah. And that's such a step back for humanity. Like, all the technology that's in there, the most amazing machines we've ever produced. Yeah. And we have to destroy them.
I mean, it would be a mild setback. Like the Taiwanese people with this knowledge, if they were able to escape the Chinese, would reproduce it elsewhere.
I imagine, like, the second that the United States is getting whiff of this happening, they're all getting extradited to the United States right away. Yeah. That's what I imagine. The second that the Chinese are threatening something like this, the United States is going to take all these Taiwanese experts and get them on shore to the place out in Arizona. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And I think that this is a part of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like, the goal. So then I want to talk about the decoupling a little bit. Okay. The goal of decoupling is not self-sufficiency. That's not the goal of the U.S. decoupling, because we've talked about plenty of times Dutch, Japan, Taiwan. We can't be self-sufficient. But the goal of decoupling is so that China does not. Okay. have enough. Forget it.
Really?
Yeah. I don't have enough to go into it. But the point is that it's not total self-sufficiency.
No.
Yes.
No, I agree. Because, I mean, when you were even talking about how greater economic interplay plays into national security ties as well, that reminded me a lot of what it seems like Nixon's initial idea about bringing China into the global system.
Yes.
Involved. That's the same rationale behind bringing them into the World Trade Organization.
It's the same rationale for Germany making the Nord Stream pipeline with Russia.
Exactly. Yeah.
The difference is these are not the Taiwanese and the Japanese and the Koreans aren't vying for global hegemony the way Russia and China are.
Yeah.
Right? That's the difference.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
they're not going to be the aggressor or the rule breakers.
Exactly. But it is in our interest to maintain some economic ties there. This is again why the Biden policy is targeted towards only the highest end chips. Right? They want to be able to maintain those ties in less important arenas. Okay. A few more points on how China is trying to combat these restrictions. Industrial espionage and talent recruitment.
Wow.
So this is where it gets interesting and feisty. So China, they want to steal the tech and the knowledge of foreign firms because they don't have it themselves. They won't be able to develop it themselves. This is especially bad in Taiwan. China sets up shell companies and hires Taiwanese workers to get their knowledge without them ever knowing. And then it will just disappear, or it'll fire the workers. And it's the same thing for, in the same way, it will offer much, much higher salaries to these Taiwanese engineers, like 500% of what they're making in Taiwan. But it's not a job for life. It's literally like they'll keep you in just as long as they need to extract all the information from your brain, fire you,
oh my God,
send you out of the country. You'll never come back.
Why is Taiwan allowing this at all?
They've actually specifically ramped up its efforts to combat this in shell companies, in like introducing new laws to strengthen the security of its industry and setting up a dedicated economic espionage judicial system.
Wow.
To speed up trials and convictions.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, again, this is the chess match.
Right.
China makes
it's
a
very
move,
fluid.
Taiwan makes a move.
It's very fluid.
It's moving constantly. Okay, besides that, they are trying to pressure Chinese firms to buy Chinese and eliminate American suppliers. So two of the biggest advantages Chinese firms have is that they don't have to do de novo innovation, which basically just means they don't have to explore the full range of possible technological paths, because the paths to take have already been discovered by foreign firms.
Sure.
This technology's already been developed, so they
Right.
just need to figure out how to walk the right path.
That makes sense.
Plus, they enjoy a lot of state financial support, so they can always be competitive on price. But their disadvantage is that their competitors' equipment already works terrifically, right? So the only way that China can really break in is by enforcing domestic demand of its domestically supplied products.
Right.
Because otherwise it's companies that want to buy foreign will buy better products.
Right.
Right. So
but now, is that going to limit their electronic capabilities now if they're going to be buying worse products?
Yeah, it will. But Xi is basically going around and specifically mentioning at speeches and in visits to work sites, like, is this run with Chinese chips? Right? Like he's trying to ramp up the pressure so that companies, and again, every company in China is connected to the Chinese government. They know that there's a specific incentive.
Right.
They get brownie points.
The chips are bad now. And they're not that bad, right? But the chips are worse than what's available in the foreign market. But once there's an internal demand from China to have better chips, that will hopefully Xi is hoping that that's going to then spur the companies to change how they're currently running things, put more money into R&D, and then eventually be able to produce chips that are at the foreign level, at least at this mid-tier chip market.
Yeah.
Right? They need to at least they need to first be able to master the mid-tier chip market of the foreign market.
Mm-hmm.
They have to do that first.
Yes.
Right. That's step one.
That's the only place they really have hope.
Right
now. Definitely. So the industrial espionage, I mean, yeah, that's one. Pressuring Chinese firms. And then the last thing is retaliation against the US and its allies. So it's doing this really in two ways. It's preventing mergers of American semiconductor companies that have operations in China. And it has a specific attack on Micron, which is an American company that I think produces like mid-tier chips. I didn't go that deep into Micron, but basically it's doing this cybersecurity review, which to me, I'm reading it as kind of a sham that they're trying to force Micron out of the Chinese market, which would potentially be a loss of 3.3 billion sales.
Jeez.
So it's specifically punishing America via American companies in this way.
Which I don't blame them for that. What we're doing to them, this is the right response. They have no choice.
Sure.
And America's already made the cost benefit analysis that this is worth it.
Yes. But to me, like, I already know that Micron is one of the companies that is signed up to make a whole new fab in New York after the CHIPS Act.
Wow.
And to me, this is kind of just like, it's just going to accelerate that process. It seems like China's doing the thing that the US is exactly trying not to do.
Right.
Galvanizing.
China's doing this. China doing this is now galvanizing us to onshore our production of the semiconductors.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's what I have for like the way China is trying to evade. It's trying to make it so these export blocks don't hit as hard. I can end that there. I have a little bit more. I don't know if you have more. What you have more?
I'm tapped out.
Okay. I'm just gonna empty everything I have because I'm too excited about it. The legacy chips is the one other thing.
The legacy chips out of Vietnam?
More out of China.
Okay.
And I want to talk about this because
define legacy chip.
Legacy chip, I think, is defined in the CHIPS Act as the 28 nanometer mark.
Got it.
So if we're talking about the highest end is 2 nanometers, 28 nanometers. These are in almost everything. They definitely run these microphones that we have right now. They run this recorder.
It's in your dishwasher and your microwave.
And cars.
Wow.
It's a big one. Cars use more than 1,700 chips per car of these legacy chips. So China has an opportunity to really disrupt American industry or global industries based on establishing a greater foothold with legacy chips. Right now, I mentioned this earlier, it's 9% of the global market.
Right. If you can't have the quality, kill it with the quantity.
Yes. And that's their strategy. That's the fear, is that because Chinese companies can be infinitely subsidized by the government, essentially, they can outcompete anybody on price. And there's this fear that they will flood the market with legacy chips so that economically it makes no sense to buy from anyone but China, because they're not behind in legacy chips.
Right.
They're not lagging the market. It makes sense to buy Chinese chips. So in response to that, America and some European countries have made a specific effort. And in fact, there are a coalition of senators that, unfortunately, this article was blocked behind a paywall, so I couldn't figure out who it was, lobbied to make sure that there was $2 billion in the CHIPS Act specifically set aside for manufacturing legacy chips. Because American companies, these companies in the higher end markets, right, they usually aren't economically incentivized to make them because the return on investment is much smaller. Like, you get lower margins.
Yeah.
But they're clearly necessary for our national security because they go into our cars and every single other thing we make, besides maybe the highest end AI development productions. So we're trying to do this. The European Union has created similar subsidies. Specific U.S. states have created additional subsidies for legacy chips.
Wow.
And so this is just an area that, even though it makes sense to focus a lot on the highest end, this can still massively affect global economies.
And a Chinese success in capturing the legacy chip market can really funnel a lot more money into their research and development for higher end chip making.
Exactly. And it's just going to create a more robust semiconductor ecosystem in the market and the research that it's going to help.
That's exactly what America is trying to stop. I think it's interesting to see how the legacy chip develops, because I think that's China's best way out.
Yes.
After what we've talked about here, and to summarize, I mean, China's kind of screwed.
Yeah.
China's kind of screwed. I mean, the United States has put on some heavy restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
We are doing some subsidies to onshore some of the production. We are having our allies are totally with us to not go with China. Some of the companies are not, but that's not the point.
Mm-hmm.
The Biden administration, with these restrictions, have really thought out a lot of the different bottlenecks that China could work around how China could work around these bottlenecks.
Yeah.
And really thought about every scenario.
Yeah.
Except for the cloud from a foreign country, which I think was really interesting.
Yeah.
So China's really in a hard place right now because they can't really keep up with military development that's going to be necessary to win a modern war in 7 years. And as we've talked about, they really need to have that war in 7 years. Otherwise, they'll never have it.
Yes, totally. There's something in one of the reports I read is there's an idea that China's, maybe I mentioned this on the last episode, Xi has asked the military to be prepared for an invasion of Taiwan by 2027.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Okay. That's frightening. I would expect that to happen.
I would expect that to happen.
The one advantage I'll say that China certainly has here is the agility of being an autocracy.
Yep. You get so much agility from that.
Once you look at this like a chess match, like the fact that China can make moves and does make moves much more quickly than the West does, it makes me think that it can have a chance. Like as I read about how it does this corporate espionage and creates all of these shell companies and spends years buying past the demand of chips to stockpile U.S. equipment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Which is not something the U.S. would ever think to do.
No, and the U.S. would never. I don't think would ever even have the capability. Like we would be politically handcuffed.
Yeah.
To not do that.
That would be market manipulation on the part of the United States government.
Yeah. So China has an advantage there, and we're just going to have to see like what moves continue to be made. This is moving so fast right now, but it's nonetheless going to be a story of years and maybe even decades,
Mm-hmm.
not days, weeks, and months.
No, this is like one of the geopolitical events of our time. This is the space race.
Yeah, this is the space race.
This is our space race.
Exactly.
Yeah, you keep talking about it as a chess game, and it seems like every time the U.S. makes a move, China makes two.
Yeah,
it's hard to keep up with that. You can keep up with it for 1 turn, 2 turns,
mm-hmm.
6 turns, the game's over.
Yeah.
But now with the CHIPS Act, with this, it looks like we just made 5 moves at a time.
Yeah.
I don't know how much more flexible we're going to be in the coming months and the years, but
maybe. But I think China's also running out of moves to make as far as evasions. Like, sure,
right.
they're going through the cloud now. There are loopholes that we still need to close off, but I think the loopholes are getting tighter and tighter.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Wow, guys.
That was awesome.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
I've learned so much, dude. That was incredible.
I had a great time.
That was so much fun.
Okay.
What are you thinking about the next topic? Are we sticking on the China topic or
a great question? We could give it a rest. I mean, we talked about the overview. We talked about South China Sea. Now we've talked about chips. Chips is the most obvious place
to
that
stop.
I think there's been confrontation.
Yeah.
It's a clear main stage. We covered that
well. It tied into current events with Blinken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think we should probably cleanse the audience's palate. Maybe with something more domestic.
We'll do something more domestic next time. Don't know what yet, but
we'll figure it out. We'll
post about it on Instagram. So go follow us there.
Love that.
Everything sucks. Let's fix it. All right, guys.